of October. We'll kick off with the you. Mate whakarongo, mate kōrero, mate nākau, mate wārua, mate manaki mai, mate manaki atu, ka pūwai, te maramatanga, tihei Māori ora. Through listening, through talking, from the heart, from the spirit, through giving and receiving respect, understanding will bloom. This is the essence of life. So welcome along everybody today. Just the housekeeping. For those who've got a good public gallery today, the toilets are just outside the chamber on your right. Should we need to evacuate for any reason, please go down the stairs at Assembly Point and Space Street, car park. Don't use the lift. And move crate, drop, cover and hold. And if we could please make sure that our phones are on silent. And just a reminder, these proceedings are being recorded for the purpose of live video, both live streaming and downloading. So by remaining in this meeting, consenting to being filmed for viewing by the public. What have we got here? At the conclusion of the meeting, we've got a workshop on the elected member remuneration and reimbursement policy, which is also to be live streamed. So we'll kick off with our first item, which is apologies. I've got one from Councillor Byers and from Councillor Duffy. Sorry.
Through you, Rob, I'm leaving at 2 o'clock today. My apologies.
And Councillor Chamberlain.
1:30.
1:30. Someone like to move?
Yes.
Good. Thank you. Councillor Barker, aye. Councillor Spraggan. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? Do we have any leave of absence for anyone?
Councillor Vopra, I indicated at finance.
We still have time for that. It is the next one.
Okay, righty ho.
Cool. So there being none. Do we have any conflict of interest on the agenda for anyone today? There being none. I don't believe we've got any extraordinary or urgent items.
No, none of them.
Let's move this. Oh, sorry. No, that's okay. So that takes us to the confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of October on page 6. Would someone like to move that they're true and correct? Thank you, Councillor O'Brien. Councillor Barker, aye. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? That is carried. Which moves us on to our public participation section. We've got 2 speakers today. So they'll be allocated 5 minutes each, and just a reminder that the questions the speakers are to be confined to obtaining information or clarification on matters raised by the speaker. So we've got Rachel Jackson. So I'll invite you everyone to come to the end of the table.
Sure, thank you.
Welcome along.
Thank you. So I'm Rachel Jackson. Thank you for having me here. Southland District Council, I call on you to address this urgent community wellbeing issue. I will begin by disclosing that I am not transphobic or a bigot. Central Southland College has implemented gender identity and sexual orientation into their relationships and sexuality curriculum without parent consent. Myself and other parents have approached the Board of Trustees twice since the beginning of August on this issue. CSC board response has been a curriculum review without parent consultation, to which they concluded that they are very happy with keeping this radical theory in. They have refused to answer any of our questions. We require urgent action and attention from you on removing this radical theory from our schools. CSC only released information on this curriculum after our children were already in it. They are teaching our children that sex assigned at birth is a mere title and not fact. They are teaching them that they can interpret their gender to be as changeable as what they are having for dinner the next night. Our young minds are being infiltrated with dangerous political propaganda. Brainwashing wherein lies secrecy, secret teachings, holding parents at bay, no answers, no consultations. The provocative brainwashing of our youngest generation. Will you stand for our children and take action with guiding Central Southland College and other local educators back into the realms of factual education? This radical theory is in James Hargis Jr. and schools up and down the country. New entrants are being asked to state their pronouns on their first day of school. Inside Out has released guidelines within the Ministry of Education for how teachers can implement their gender ideology into English, math and science, widely overstepping into the realms of idealism. I want idealism removed from schools. Respect can be taught without being educated in radical sexualised theory before legal consenting age. Family Planning's Navigating the Journey is the curriculum recommended to schools through the Ministry of Education for RSE. They are recommending to parents that they are to encourage sexuality conversations from a very young age. They state, don't wait for the child to initiate this. Instead, you encourage them in everyday conversations. Sexualising our children. As council, you are head of local social and cultural fields. You are in charge of leading our community into 2024 and the future. Give our children a fair fighting chance. You are in position of shaping our community and our schools equally so. You hold power and influence. Our children are not guinea pigs. They will not be put through trial by political furnace. A radical political fire consuming this generation. Since when did children's safety not become paramount ahead of biased minority political agenda? We held our own community consultation in Winton on the 26th of August in response to our school refusing a parent consultation. The venue was full with up to 180 in attendance. Community is concerned. Current policy and procedure within Splash Palace refuses to detail that only born female may enter female changing areas and born male to enter male changing areas. Instead, anyone who identifies as that gender may enter those private areas. Stephen Cook and Nobby Clark refused to rewrite policy to future-proof this glaring safety risk to children. Why are so many elected into top privileged positions afraid to take a stand for our children? Too blind. I will not allow this stampede to trample all over our human rights as parents and for the Vulnerable Children's Act not to be adhered. After school sessions at He Wakatuia, currently holding an exhibition with portraits by Adrian Martin titled Scene/Scene, an LGBTQ+ theme. Has there been restricted age limit for certain exhibitions after school sessions? Sexual orientation/gender identity theme before the legal age of consent. You oversee all public sporting facilities, libraries, playgrounds, bathroom areas. I'm giving you a chance to get ahead of this. Future-proof our community against the carnage of minority agenda. Safety first. Protect our children and protect our children from adult idealism. Let our children be children.
That was well fitted into the 5 minutes. Thank you for coming along and speaking to us. Got a question from Councillor Van.
Just a clarification. Thank you, Mr. Jackson, for coming in. And I can assure you, from my side, if our council progresses into steps that some other councils like Auckland and others have taken to have cross-dressing men reading out books to young children, minor children, under the guise of inclusivity, I'll be joining you on that side of the table. As regarding this particular exhibition by Adrian Martin, I believe it was mid-September, and I remember calling because the art gallery named Cargill holds afternoons 3 to 5 for children drop in and who can have these art lessons. If you go and look at their Facebook page on the day when they put this up, I first called them. I was hung up on asking what is the age restriction. I think my comment, at least last night when I looked at it, was still there. How are you age restricting this exhibition, this art session, because the afternoon drawing lessons are supposed to be inspired by an LGBTQI artist. So just like you, both as an elected member and as a mom, I share your concerns. And as I said, if we progress into some of those realms, I'll be with you on that side of the table. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Just a reminder that it's sort of questions only from the team. Councillor Wilson?
Just, yeah, thanks for that. I was quite confusing to me. I don't have kids, so I'm not aware of what's going on at schools and that, but I understand what you're saying with facilities like toilets and sports amenities and things, but from the education side of things, what practical steps can council make beyond advocacy, I guess, with involvement in the education sector? Like, it's kind of, I know it's well-being, and the full well-beings are quite broad in terms of local government, but what can council do when it comes to schools?
I feel like you're in the powerful position where schools aren't listening to us, parents, who are coming to school with questions in regards to what our children are being taught. They are refusing to give us answers. So that's when I feel like I can come to council, because I've done my steps with trying to communicate with my school, to no avail, refusal to answer questions. So then I come to my council for you to help advocate my voice to them, and for them to actually acknowledge our concerns, and for them to actually acknowledge that we would like to be consulted as parents in the community when it comes to idealistic teachings in our school. Because right now it's being taught under a secretive wrap and a secretive blanket, and I don't trust that. Why do they feel the need to keep this part of the education secret from parents? I feel like that's when it immediately comes to me under propaganda, especially when the school will not share specific video links that are being shown in class, and that I have to ask my daughter to actually share something with me that she had to ask for a teacher. It was a gender identity video, something that the school did not share with us, even upon request. So it's under a guise, it's under secrecy. I don't trust secrecy. I want confidence in my school, and I'm used to having a good relationship with my school. And this is, quite frankly, confusing ideology for any age, primary and secondary. I don't feel like they should have to navigate through their school years questioning that I could be maybe a boy or maybe I'm a girl. Too confusing. Something for them to explore after school.
On the subject, I don't know where it stands. I'm just more curious because I'm new to this environment, and I haven't really in the last 12 months crossed over where we have a mandate into education or the Ministry of Education, or kind of, it seems out of scope. But yeah, I curious.
I feel like this, like, how confusing is it for a 5-year-old to state what their pronouns are on their first day of school, something that none of us as parents had to go through. Quite confusing. And they are being taught through this curriculum from year 1 all the way up to year 12. So it's just on repeat. And it starts ramping up the older they get. They're exploring stereotypes and gender roles right from year 1.
Cool, just conscious we've got another speaker, so we need to move this along. I've got a final quick question from Councillor O'Brien.
Thanks very much for coming on, Rachel. You'll be aware that councils, generally speaking, don't delve into the realms of churches and schools and those sorts of organisations, but I do believe that there is a subsection in the law under the Local Government New Zealand Act, under the wellbeing guise, whereby we can look at these sorts of things. So I think we should look into that. And you said that you had some consultation with the school, but you're not satisfied with that consultation.
No, we didn't have consultation with the school. We went to the Board of Trustees as parents, and after the Board of Trustees meetings, 2 of what we went to, they refused to answer our questions even after the meeting. Yes.
Okay.
And we, even before those Board of Trustees meetings, I had started my dialogue with the school requesting parent consultation before curriculum was implemented at the beginning of June. They said no need for parent consultation. They denied it. And then it wasn't until after our 2 Board of Trustees meetings, after our children had already sat in the curriculum, that they started to entertain the idea of having a parent consultation after the fact in term 4, something we're still waiting for. We haven't been given a date for yet, and the school year is about to close.
So have you had any correspondence back from the Ministry of Education after taking it to them because of your sentiments or respective sentiments between the board and yourself?
So basically the Ministry of Education, they're following inside inside outs guidelines, and the more you read into it, it's being trickled into the entire curriculum, not just relationships and sexuality. On the Ministry of Education webpage, you can find it yourself, Inside Out have released guidelines for how teachers can implement gender ideology into maths, English and science, so all across the board. This is minority idealism. Why is it even in our factual subjects? In schools, I feel, should stick to fact, not idealism. And it's minority agenda being taught to the majority at young, vulnerable ages before the age of sexual consent.
Thank you. Just a final comment from me. Have you, or question from me, I should say, have you engaged with your local MP at all?
I have multiple times, no response for months.
Well, thank you very much for coming along and speaking, and really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you very much, Rob Scott. Thank you.
Right, next up we've got, I believe she's sitting there, Christine Henderson. And we've got a handout that's getting...
Yes, and Fiona, can I give you some more, please? Yes. Follow that one.
Welcome along, Mrs. Henderson.
Thank you, Rob. My comments are prefaced by need to look at climate change and have policies from all councils that start to address them. And I also come from a position of former Historic Places Trust member and society for 77 years, and I have seen some changes which aren't always good. Now, Cadrona, I just want to explain the pictures first. Cadrona is one of my favourite places, along with Huntavasa's toilets at Kawakawa, the Parthenon and Persepolis, etc., etc. I note that the young people have posed for their wedding picture in front of that gorgeous old farming building, which is obviously something that resonates with them. I have marked the word defunct because that comes up shortly. Bank of New South Wales would have fitted the criteria that we're discussing today, which is dirty, unsanitary and dangerous buildings. And thanks to the Troopers Memorial Trust, it was saved and now be looking at a new future. And I was appalled to read on the last page that the former Club Hotel in Bluff was declared a dangerous building because the veranda was dangerous. Now, that's appalling and putting into disrepute any policy by this council or the City Council trying to rectify the big gap in protecting heritage buildings. I went past Briscoe's building this morning, which is of course very sad, but also noticed that the building beside it still has sprouting cocksfoot. Now, I talked about that to Mr. Wynne Clark, who was an architect who came down to Historic Places Trust a few years after the Christchurch earthquake. He said the problem with that is that if you don't clean the spoutings, the wooden frameworks of a lot of these buildings rot, and that, he said, is one of the reasons why the fronts of a lot of buildings in Christchurch collapsed onto the streets in that terrible, terrible earthquake. So it's a case of sticking to your knitting, getting those spoutings cleaned. I think there are other, perhaps, council buildings that may have suffered the same fate of nobody caring for their spoutings, and we know as householders how important that is. So that's why I put in spoutings and earthquakes. There's a lot here. One of the things I'd like to see is the council working together to look at these buildings, because we're looking at embedded carbon here, rather than new builds, which of course increase the carbon footprint of any new build. And you'll see here a whole lot of lists of things: waste not, want not. You see, I still wonder where the centre of town went to. Would it go out to the rubbish dump at Winton, or did it have its own little place where all those materials have been dumped without any thought of trying to find them and reuse them? There's the Art Deco building just down by the railway station, just being trashed. Rob, I put at the front the industrial solution, because I know you and quite a few other people in Southland really cherish their classic vehicles. In fact, we went to a classic vehicle collection of Voxes down at Landfill Airport just over the weekend. You would you would not consider trashing something that precious to you, and that's how I feel about what the few remaining heritage buildings we have in Lumsden, in Invercargill and Southland generally that we still have around. They are what people really look at when they come as tourists. I stood outside the Southland Times building one day in spring, and 2 Chinese people were taking photographs. I said to them, "Why are you doing that?" They said, "We don't have anything like this in Hong Kong." When you look at Hong Kong, you see what they do have, which is not people-sized buildings. Another lady was taking a photograph, and I said, "Why are you doing that?" And she said, "Well, you don't have very many Art Deco buildings in the UK." She was from England. We have the second biggest collection of Art Deco buildings outside Napier, and here's one being trashed because it's defunct. We've got to change the language as well, because defunct is actually demolition by neglect, and it's a terrible, terrible thing to watch. And when we look at the future of the city and the community, we need to look at these heritage buildings and say, give them a new life. It's almost sacrilege to think that they should go just so easily. I know you haven't had very much time to look at it, and I don't expect you to need to question me, but if you would like to, I'm happy to. There are lots of... the Mars specialists. Mr. and Mrs. Henbest came to talk to our Astronomical Society one year, and they stood by Russell Beck's umbrella, looked around, and they said, in all our travels around the world, and they were experts on Mars, so they did the astronomical circuit, they said, we've never seen so many brilliant examples of different building styles in one space. Art and craft and all the other ones that we have around that we often take for granted. They lived in a 400-year-old farmhouse in the Cotswolds, so they knew about heritage buildings. And so if there's any message at all today, it's, can we please look after our heritage buildings as much as we look after our heritage cars, trucks, tractors, and vintage collector's items of all sorts and types. And I'd also like the council to do what the City Council look as if it's trying to do, which is to work with the owners, be cooperative rather than punitive, and try and work out how to make these things happen, because a lot of them, I understand, are absentee owners. So it would be good if we had a policy to look and find out where these owners are, like the ones in Winton who own the theatre, and try and work with them to save these buildings, because they are part of our heritage, a part of our history, and we're looking at our local history in our new curriculum coming up this next year, I think, and that should be where we start.
I'm sorry to have
how much time that is, but...
Can't cut you short, you've just gone over the 5 minutes.
Oh, right. That's typical of me.
But yeah, no, thank you for coming along. Do we have any questions from the floor for Mr. Henderson?
Yeah, thanks very much for coming along, Christine. I share your sentiments in terms of having a love and passion for heritage buildings in particular. I live in a very, very old house, and whenever I get a visitor coming to my house, they say, God, it's like a museum in this place. So, you know, it's trying to be able to embrace that heritage and that culture and that personal connection, and sharing that is very important, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. You talk in this report about circular economies in terms of reuse and recycle. It really is just a question of assessing each particular case by case. And I'm going to ask you a question. Have you made contact with the likes of Dr. Matt Schmidt, who is the head of...
I know him through Historic Places Trust.
Historic Places, Heritage New Zealand. I would think that he would be a great resource for you to engage with in terms of saying, well, we've got these particular buildings that are at this particular level. You know, it'd be really interesting to hear his thoughts in particular on some of that. Can you give us some feedback on
one of the problems we have, of course, is taking what you've just said, Tom. In the olden days, we used to have, the late names I forget now. We had to go through a process of looking at the building, then looking at the history of it, and then deciding whether it was worth it being saved. And it was usually pre-1900. And now, of course, over 100 years later, we should be looking at up to 1940s, because 100 years, or almost Art Deco anyway. And I'm hoping that what I talked about, which is a suggestion, Tom, it should be that it's an overall protection of those buildings until something happens to them, and then research should be done, because it's very onerous, and only for the really dedicated that these things get done. In the meantime, we lose horrendous numbers of our heritage buildings, and you'll all have your own favourites, I know that, but like the Taj Mahal or all these other beautiful places. So yes, I will talk to Matt and see what we can do about that. In the meantime, if we can just look at you working with the other councils, for instance, talking to the oyster people and saying, is this the right place for you, or could we find another place for you so you don't have to worry about having to do something with the hotel? Because that's obviously not their thing. And finding somebody who would love to do it up for boutique shops and apartments and all sorts of other uses. So thank you for that thought. The other thing is, can I draw your attention to the article above the New South Wales building? The architects of England study an article about the architectural group in England. They're talking about the circular economy and launched a retrofit first campaign. And just read through that, you'll see, but there's another 9 pages before that, which is also worthwhile looking at in terms of saving and reusing demolition materials. So it's obviously we can't do everything right now, but one last thing. It turns out the pyramid could have been made safe for $1 million, and then we could have done something with it, like a planetarium. This is instead of 159 plus million for something new that may or may not be what we need.
Just one last question.
Very quickly.
Very quickly. And this is a yes or no. Have you considered crowdfunding? So to validate, if you have a particular heritage product or building, have you considered, and you really want to validate the value overall, have you considered a crowdfunding of option?
For how many buildings?
It could be one building. It could be your favourite building, and you could say, right, I'm really passionate about this, and you can open it up. You can ultimately open it up to the people and say, well, if you really care about this, we can do some sort of crowdfunding.
That would be the last resort, I think, Tom, because that would be a huge undertaking. I was one of the people who lobbied Eve Paul to save the Civic Theatre, and I know what's involved there. So, you know, it's not easy. But if there's a policy by the councils to actually look at retrofit first, that would be so helpful, because then we can look at all the other ramifications for it. So thank you very much for your time, Robin and councillors. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Also, that concludes our half an hour on the dot, our public participation time.
Sorry about that, Chief.
Thank you to everyone that came along. And just before I kick into our first item, 7.1, I just wanted to acknowledge over the last 3 weeks when Cameron's been away on leave, we had Jane standing in for him, and the appreciation that I've got for the great job that she did on day one in the job. We had a state of emergency and a flood, so it was but yeah, just wanted to publicly acknowledge my appreciation of the good work that Jane did, so thank you very much, Jane. And we'll move now to 7.1, which is a draft annual report, which is on page 25 of your agenda. Something that we've spent quite a lot of time on in the last few years, and I'll hand over to
Yeah, carry your worship, councillors. Councillor Graney online. Thank you all. Along with Teresa, we're presenting the audited annual report to council for adoption this morning. We'll take the cover report, the annual report, the summary, in the summary is read, in noting that the report was presented to the Finance and Assurance Committee last week, along with the auditor's report, and that the committee had time with Mike Fulton last week to discuss that report. So for today's report, we are being asked to receive the recommendations from the Financial Insurance Committee. The council adopt the report and endorses the summary report. That the council have been asked to adopt the annual report and endorse the summary report. They're being asked to delegate authority to the Chief Executive and the Mayor to sign the annual report letter of representation to Deloitte on behalf of council. And we're asking council to delegate authority to the Chief Executive and the Chair of the Finance and Assurance to approve any minor changes to the 22-23 annual report and summary subsequent to this meeting. So the draft annual report was initially presented to the committee on the 6th of September ahead of being released to Deloitte for audit. Following the audit process, the audited annual report was in the summary document, and the draft report was presented to the Finance and Assurance Committee last week on the 18th of October for a recommendation to adopt today. Following the adoption of the report today, the final report will be printed for public and uploaded onto the Southland District Council website. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Teresa to update you on any changes since the Finance and Assurance meeting last week. Thank you.
Good morning. As mentioned in paragraph 8 of the report, Deloitte have provided the draft audit opinion for both the summary and the full annual reports. I have reviewed both of these reports in line with the 21-22 reports, and there have been no material changes. In the summary report, there's been updated commentary around the developments in the government's free water reform program, and in the full report, it mentions the uncertainty around the financial impact of the Three Waters program. I've also received a revised management report. As mentioned, Mike Hawking from Deloitte discussed the management report at the Finance and Assurance Committee meeting on the 18th of October. Mike at that meeting mentioned the landfill aftercare provision and the adjusted misstatement of the 230k which were related to vested assets. Those two items have been updated in the management report. And I've received devised independent assurance report. Deloitte have provided an updated one as they just changed the wording around clause 10.2 in the debenture trust, just a minor change there. Thank you, Your Worship. Any questions?
Yeah, I guess just a point for me to reiterate the comments by our Finance and Assurance Chairman, who works with a lot of councils up and down the country, and his congratulations on the team for getting this done in the time frame and getting that complimentary audit report as well. So I think that's to be commended. So yeah, I don't have any questions myself, but is there anything from the floor? We had quite a big discussion on this last week, so there's probably not much more to address. Councillor Wilson.
I guess just the only question regarding 49 costs and funding, the fact that this year there was an increase of about 27.61%. Is there any thought that I know we had a change of auditor and that was kind of forced upon us, but is there any thought that we'll see similar increases in years to come, or is that kind of level of increase not expected again?
That increase was mentioned, I think, about in 2020, that they weren't getting their full costs for the audit and they were going to increase. I have read that they do expect it now to be around the CPI increase going forward.
What's the CPI?
Consumer Price Index, which is around, I think, 5.8% or something like that. It fluctuates each year, but they do expect it to be the CPI increase going forward.
I think, again, just noting the conversation from last week, that we're at the bottom end of those sort of charges, and we're not the only council to face the increase, and yeah, we're at the lower end of the increase, which is still hard to swallow, but easier to swallow than some of the larger ones. And I think reflective of the auditor's comment that it was an easy process and the team were really easy to work with, and that's reflected in the cost as well. So I think that's right. Well, if there's no further questions, sorry, Councillor Beaufort.
Lisa, if I could please ask you, could you run that line past me again, the changes in the debenture trust?
To the debenture trust, clause 10.2G, it actually read, because I did put it down here. The amount of stock and how much is security stock and bearer stock, and the principal money owed or secured under the stock distinguished between security stock and other categories of stock. It's been updated because the Debenture Trust actually was updated. And
This year.
sorry?
Trust, it was updated in July this year?
I'm sorry, I'd have to go back and
All right.
check that, but the wording is the aggregate outstanding principal amount of the notes on issue expressed in dollars and the aggregate indebtedness secured by security stock expressed in dollars. So there's just a wording change in there.
Okay, so we've got our motions on recommendations on page 25. Noting that we received the recommendation from Finance and Insurance Committee that the Council adopt the annual report and endorse the summary annual report for the year ended 30 June 23. That we adopt the annual report and endorse the annual report summary for the year ended 30th of June 23, subject to any final amendments required, of which the delegated authority will be to the Chief Executive and myself to sign the annual report letter of representation to Deloitte on behalf of the Council, and that we also delegate authority to the Chief Executive and the Chair of Finance and Insurance to approve any minor changes to the report and summary annual report subsequent to this meeting. Do we have someone in a position to move? Councillor Ruttencourt, Councillor Bokarai. No further discussion. I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye.
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 Anyone against? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next item is on page 35 of the agenda, which is 7.2, the Easter Sunday shop trading policy, deliberation and adoption. Welcome.
Your Worship and Councillors. So today's report seeks approval from Council to adopt the Easter Sunday shop trading policy. The policy has had engagement with the community and stakeholders, and that's helped to inform the policy. Formal consultation resulted in 9 submissions, 8 in support and 1 in opposition. One submitter was heard at Council's 4th of October meeting. Given the support from the community, the proposed policy continues to allow shops to open on Easter Sunday if they wish to. So I'm happy to take any questions.
There is another report that's been through the council quite a lot lately, so do we have any questions? I don't imagine there probably be. There being none, I'll go to the motions on page 75. So we're basically considering the feedback received on the draft Easter Sunday shop trading policy and resolve to replace the existing policy and adopt the draft. No, sorry, Councillor Chamberlain.
Oh, no,
Are you happy to move it?
Happy to move it.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Ruttencourt, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
That's carried. Thanks, Teresa. Thanks for your work on that. Right, so it takes us to 7.3, the addendum to the draft speed management plan 24-27 consultation. I believe just a minor adjustment to make.
Thank you. Good morning. So the purpose of the report is to present an addendum to the draft speed management plan 24-27 for the council to endorse for public consultation. When preparing the consultation communication for the schools, the draft speed management plan, staff identified that the proposal for 2 schools were omitted, in the Tianau School and Fiordland College. That they had been omitted from the draft SMP. These schools we suspect were omitted due to the draft speed management plan haven't been developed in a condensed time frame, but also just the pure number of schools that we got across the district and that we're trying to encapsulate, particularly how big those zones might be around each school. The preferred approach of the staff is that the proposal within the addendum is consulted on alongside the current draft speed management plan, with the consultation period for the draft speed management plan extended to align to the 4-week requirement or minimum requirement under the law. If council endorses the addendum to the draft speed management plan for 24-27 for consultation, it will be included with the consultation for the draft SMP and extended to the end of the consultation period from 10 November till 24th of November, and consultation will be undertaken in accordance with Section 82 of the Local Government Act. I'm happy to take any questions in relation.
And look, from staff, our apologies. We stuffed up. We try to do the easiest way we can to fix that stuff up that still allows for the full consultation, still meets the time frames that we have in terms of doing this work and bring those people in. So, our bad. Sorry.
Thank you for the frank apology. Do we have any questions from the floor? That's all. Yeah, Councillor.
Just one, for likes of country schools, is it better to have, just the flashing that's on a main road, that when the school's not in, it seems pointless having to slow down. So will that be a sort of a focus that, or a priority that the speed signs are only up during school hours, or?
Yeah, so that's, the way we've looked at it is, call it the main roads, that they will have the flashing lights in essence and have variable speed, so only during the pickup drop-off times that the speed limit will be in place, and then for the rest of the time it will be the standard speed limit. There are quieter streets that, like a cul-de-sac or something like that, that might be directly adjacent to a school. We're looking at having those as more permanent.
So that'd be quite clear on the council website that that's an option.
Yep. So the maps that are supplied outline for each of the streets what we propose.
Cheers, Southland. Is the for all the variable speed proposals, are they all inclusive of then that flashing light signage, or would some be static signage, or even though it's a variable speed limit, or is the only way to do it with more electronic signage? The cost, I guess, is the question I'm getting to.
So there's a combination of both. We'd look to use the more electronic ones on the main, higher volume roads, where the lower volume. So there's criteria around when to consider which signs for which types of roads, based on the environment and the volume of traffic.
Is that
a bit of a
into the consultation, or will that work come after the consultation on the actual speeds? Is there consultation on how those speeds will be managed or advertised, or will that work come later?
Not sure. Well, if I've understood the question correctly, the speed will. This is more around the actual speed and what's proposed as permanent versus the temporary. The actual mechanics of it, we're working through that. So we have already had a bit of a look at that, and what might be, to your point earlier, the static signs with just time frames around when those speed limits versus the flashing. So we've done a bit of background work on that, but not necessarily looking at consulting specifically on those aspects of it.
Thanks.
So I've got our recommendations there on page 47, noting that we endorse and release the addendum to the speed management plan set out in the attachment for consultation in accordance with section 82 from 8 a.m. Friday the 27th of October until 5 p.m. Friday 24th of November, and we agreed to extend the consultation period for the draft speed management plan for at 5 p.m. Friday the 24th. Councillor Wilson, Councillor Keast, all those in favour please say aye. Anybody against? Maybe not against. Thanks, Sarah. I declare that carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, back to our policies again. We've got the draft use of drones policy deliberations and adoption. So it's on page 57.
Good morning, Richard. Good morning, councillors. The purpose of this report is to present the draft use of drones policy for deliberation and adoption. So this policy outlines council's approach to the use of unmanned aerial vehicles over at land it controls or owns. We've gone out for formal consultation and we received 6 submissions, none of which required to be heard. So a discussion of the points that were raised both in consultation and in pre-engagement have been outlined in the report, which I'll take as read. The policy remains unchanged in terms of scope and purpose since it last was presented to you, but you will notice that we have changed the title. Now, we took on board the comments that were raised when this last came to you, and we sought guidance from the Civil Aviation Authority in terms of how we could refer to drones. They've confirmed that there is a wide variety of terms used and a fair amount of interchangeability even amongst their own organisation.
So in order to balance making sure this policy reaches the people it needs to, which is Part 101 recreational user, but also does what it needs to, we're proposing to exchange the term unmanned aerial vehicle, UAV, for the word drones, but clearly articulating within the body of the policy exactly what the scope of that word encompasses, so that the application of the policy remains as we currently have. So Kevin and I have to answer any questions today, but we're looking today for Council's decision and whether it chooses to go ahead and adopt the policy as it's presented or propose a different way forward. So thank you.
Okay. Are there any questions from the floor? I think we've had quite a lot of discussion on this one. It's actually quite good having them in sort of quick succession, so it's all quite fresh in our minds. So,
so Your Worship, in our consultations with CAA, they confirmed they are trying, or they're planning to align the naming conventions in their review coming up, which will make it easier to have a consistent name. But at the moment, with the multiple names, it was just what do we do in the meantime? And they agreed that if we just call it a drone policy, it would be acceptable. So, yeah.
Yeah, keeping up with the changing technology all the time.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, no one knew what a drone was probably 10, 15 years ago. Cool. So we've got our recommendations there on page 57. Is there a councillor in the position to move? Councillor Fraser, seconded by Councillor Menzies. There's no further discussion. I'll put the motions. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anybody against? Carried. Thank you. Well, just skip a page while we're waiting on the staff member to come. So we're going to head to the 101 Newcastle Street, Riversdale, item 7.6, the gifting of the land. And I'll leave Sarah Jane. First time presenting to council. Welcome along. This is on page 283 of your agenda.
Good morning, thank you, Your Worship. I take the report taken as read. This report is presented to Council, so the gifting of 101 Newcastle Street, Riversdale from the Riversdale and District Progress League will be considered and recommended. Land similar to 101 Newcastle Street, which is a public open space, is normally owned and managed by Council either as a park or a reserve. The accepting of this gift as a park is supported and recommended by the Ardlusa Community Board. The transfer of ownership of 101 Newcastle Street will be the only change for this parcel of land, as it is currently maintained by Council as part of the local mowing contract.
Councillor Wilson, did you have any comment from the community board side that you wanted to add? Or
I guess the only comment from my observation, I can't really speak on behalf of the board or from the chair directly, but what I did notice in this, what led up to this decision, was there was confusion in the first place over who was the owner of the land. I think the Progress League were receiving rates bills and were inquiring about the management of the land going forward, and then it wasn't fully understood actually how much land was in part of that parcel, and it seemed to go a lot further down the road. There's a little bit of concern over the protection of the memorial trees that have been planted along there just in the long term, but it's understood that by going to a park reserve, then it's not quite as strict as what the Reserve Act might entail, but there's still at least protections for the community to have some say in what happens with that land going forward. But yeah, just observationally, it was an interesting beginning of the conversation of who owns this. There was confusion from both the Progress League, Council, the Community Board, and it took a little bit of clarification to know kind of who was the land owner, who was the land manager, and this seems to get it all wrapped up and tidied up, so everyone seems happy.
Questions from that? Well, looks pretty straightforward to me. I think it's like Councillor Wilson said, good to have it all cleaned up and tidied up, and I think the community's on board with it. So, is someone in a position to move our recommendations A through to F? Councillor Menzies, seconded by Councillor Chamberlain. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? That's carried. Thank you. Right, we'll go back in time to item 7.5, the closed landfill risk assessment report. A big report in our agenda, page 85.
Thank you. So, in the middle of 2022, we engaged E3 Scientific, based out of Arrowtown, to undertake basically a risk assessment on all our landfills around the district. We had previous reports done over the last 20 odd years, but nothing had sort of been actioned from them. So the history is, historically, waste disposal of the district was decentralised. Every township had a local dump that you take your rubbish to. When the Resource Management Act came into effect, SDC, as either the current landowner or the successor of the local county, took over responsibility for those landfills, hence we're in charge of responsible for any actions going forward. So we had 500,000 allocated in 2021, 2022 and 23-24 to investigate these landfills. From that, we got the E3 scientific report. One of the big recommendations for that was to engage some engineers to look at at-risk sites from erosion, particularly around rivers. Those sites are Bayswater, Braesbush, Ataudau, Thornbury and River and Rocks. So we engaged E2 Environmental, who are no relation of E3 Scientific, and their engineers come back with recommendations to remove Bayswater, Braesbush and River and Rocks and protect in place Ataudau and Thornbury. So this report today is just basically giving an update of what's happened in the last 12 months and what our intentions going forward are.
Just a question on that 500k, because I noted in there it was to assess and to potentially implement. Is there any of that budget left, or is it all sort of being used up in the assessment part?
So that the remainder of that budget is getting used over this financial and potentially some of next financial to undertake the water sampling on the site. So that was recommended at.
Are there any questions from the floor? Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, thanks, Regan. Cheers, and cheers to the team who did the work on it. Just two questions. One is the landfill reports, will they go to their community boards, relative community boards, as an update?
I think we can.
But we can.
Yeah.
The other one, just I guess not contesting, but looking at say the Waikaia report. There's a list of ownership for Southland District Council. Is that referring to ownership of the land, or is that ownership of the consent for disposal? So this one on the attachment is page 183.
So I give a SLUS number at the top.
SLUS 0000169.
169, perfect.
Just while Regan's looking, I think it's important for anyone that's listening online as well, that even if we don't own the land, we're still responsible for the landfill as a council. So we don't have to necessarily own the land to be responsible for what's actually on it. So
I would say, Councillor Wilson, that's a mistake. I'm 90% sure that is owned by the station that's in there. So,
right, the council owns.
Yeah, I'll clarify that.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, just checking that, if there's any inconsistencies within the report itself, and if there's any, I guess the community boards for a start is a good place to begin a level of peer review as well on the data that has been. I'm just bringing that local knowledge into it, because that's been pointed out of that. Cheers.
If I may just clarify, Regan, so E3 Scientific, you said, is an Arrowtown-based consultancy?
Yes.
And E2 Environmental, I'm a bit confused, so they're part of that same outfit?
No, they're completely separate companies.
Okay, E3, E2, right, and where are they based?
E2 is based out of Christchurch.
Okay.
So E2 was recommended to us from E3 because they've had previous work in that sort of area.
Right.
There isn't an E1?
or an E4.
So this was outside the scope of E3, that's why they obviously sort of subcontracted this, right?
Yeah, so the E2 report was based around the erosion risks, looking at it from an engineering point of view as a protect in place or remove sort of idea.
Right.
Councillor Menzies.
Thank you, Your Worship. It was very useful reading through that report. I found that very informative. I note that we've had a number of assessments over the century, and I'm just not clear from what you indicated at the start of the conversation whether there has been follow-up to the previous assessments in the previous reports, and if there hasn't, what's changing this time?
So there's been nothing substantial that we can find done, so no big sampling routines or no remediation works on the site. So our drive behind getting the wheels back in motion is that we have these reports historically and nothing has been done. So if something were to go catastrophically wrong in an event, then the questions start getting asked, how come you knew about this potential risk 20 years ago and didn't start actioning it? So at some point it needs to be started to get actioned, and this is the time that we've decided to commit some resources and some money to doing that.
We may have been fortunate over the last 20 years not to have that scenario. So in terms, one other question just around the relationship with Environment Southland over this, because one of these reports was commissioned by Environment Southland, and what are the links between our work and the monitoring that's occurring to ensure that we're working effectively together around this in the future?
Yep. So I'm going to sit down with Environment Southland after we've tabled this report to our own council. So they are wanting to see these reports. We have said that we will present them to them. However, we wanted to present it to our own council first. So we have quite a good relationship with their contaminated land team, and they're quite open and they understand that we've got issues, so they want to work together to find a way forward around them.
So the recommended monitoring ahead, which is different for different sites, will be undertaken by our staff as recommended, and we can expect further reports on a regular basis, just ensuring that that is occurring.
Yep.
Councillor Fraser and then Councillor Chamberlain.
I'm kind of interested, there's a quite historic in a number of cases, and so the waste was produced quite some time ago and we're simply moving that waste. Is there any scope for, is there a request for not having to pay some of those waste disposal fees and carbon costs, given that it's historic and that's a large portion of the costs of moving it? Because we're trying to do the right thing. It just seems we're paying for today's cost of waste when it was, an old waste, and that's millions.
No, it's definitely a question to ask the Ministry for the Environment if they would consider waiving the waste disposal levy on that rubbish. It's something that I will definitely follow up on.
I mean, it seems that we're actually trying to do the right thing, and it would cost us less money to just leave it there, and it would be another problem. But yeah.
Thanks.
And then, of course, is there any other funding that could help? And that is the other question. Then probably a related question to what Cameron talked about before. I noticed a few of those sites are SDC owned and used by, they don't appear to have a use by us. Is that part of something we're looking at, of disposing some of those sites?
It gets very awkward to try dispose of land when it's a known hail site. So even if we were to dispose of the land in some way, I don't think we would be able to do it without the guarantees that the landfill would be protected.
Yeah.
So that also turns off a lot of potential buyers. We've had inquiries from different companies around some of the sites. As soon as they find out it's a hail site, we got a very big, thanks for your time, we're no longer interested.
Could there be an opportunity to lease that land to people though? Well, I guess if we advertise some of these pockets of land that people might not want to take the ownership on, but might be able to put them to use and provide a bit of an income stream.
It's definitely a possibility, and there is quite a few sites around the district that are just grass paddocks informally leased to a neighbour or that sort of arrangement, but it would be something that could be looked into as future uses for those sites.
I think there was one in Winton that was sold just a few years ago, the land underneath the building, but I could be wrong.
Through your worship.
I've just got Councillor Chamberlain and then I'll come to you, Tom.
Through your right, thanks. Just following on from Darren's question, because the cost of putting it in the landfill is quite high. Likes of a Taddo, I mean, if you could waiver those dump charges, does that change the whole thinking around the Taddo site? Because it was 900,000, I see, just to reinforce the site. And the other question I had is, when you go to a site like that, do you leave all the topsoil behind? There's buckets you can put on diggers that'll shake the topsoil out. Is to reduce the tonnage of stuff that you've got to shift.
Yes, so that is all considered. It's the same as ripping out scrap metal, all those sort of things. A DSI would be required, detailed site investigation, which will tell you if that topsoil is contaminant free. If it is, then leave it on site, sort it, reduce the cost of dump, reduce your cost for reinstatement. So, yeah, and the waiver of that levy over $50 a tonne over 30-odd thousand, few thousand tonnes can soon add up. So it's definitely something we'll
that was my question, especially with the Taddo. I mean, perhaps better to dealing with the problem rather than trying to put up some makeshift wall that you're only pushing it down the track later for someone else to deal with. But
and if I could, just add to that, that was one thing that our E2 did mention, is that in some situations it is $100,000 cheaper to protect in place, but removing it completely removes the risk for future. So that was part of the reasoning behind some of the recommendations there on those smaller, close price sites.
I think to that point, like if we're saving at least $60 a tonne, if we don't have to pay that levy, then that might actually make a difference to some of those.
Definitely happy to have that reassessed once, if there's some movement with having to pay the levy.
And especially with the Taddo, does it have to be, can you, if you're moving it back from the water, could it be staged over a few years, or are you better to get in and look at all that in one hit? But
that would be another question to ask our consultants, but I think they're sort of the view that you're easier just to get in, get it ripped out, reinstate the site. The less time you can have anything exposed or compromised, the better.
But you're right, distance from a stream may mean that there's a reason why you could do it in stages, possibly. But that's definitely a good question for our consultants.
Councillor O'Brien, it's okay.
Just a quick comment, really. I noticed in some of the photos that have been taken on the site examination, there was fly tipping occurring. And I'm not sure how the monitoring is going to occur, how the frequency of that, but that was seen to be important, particularly with the escalation and charges for taking stuff to the official transfer stations. Are there any ways in which we might be able to monitor that in conjunction with the recommendations?
Yep. So we have been monitoring the sites. We haven't yet managed to get around all of them. It's more of you're going through a tower, you stop, you have a quick look sort of situation. We did remove a lot of fly-tipped rubbish from the Wallistown site 6 months ago. So we are looking to remove it, and there is some sites where it will have to happen. It's just a matter of getting there, seeing the extent of it, and programming it to be completed.
And just the community boards might be happy just to keep an ongoing eye on those sites to ensure that people seeing it's now free of fly tipping, but thinking that's an opportunity to continue to do the same.
We'll raise that with them as well.
Just a question for me around the rocks for the protection coming from Green Island. Do we not have quarries more within our district, noting the cost of the transport of those?
Sorry,
I don't have the page, sorry.
yeah, sorry, that's.
I would have thought there'd be the special type of rock or anything, but
No, I believe it's riprap rock. I believe that what they were basing those quotes on from Green Hills was just a per tonne cost for transporting at different distances. I don't have the page, sorry, I've got the report. So they have $23 per tonne for 40 to 60 kilometres, whereas at 160 kilometres, you're $72 a tonne. So that was more the high level, here's a rough sort of figure to supply riprap. So ideally we would look for closer sources, but we also need to be considerate that it needs to be the right material as well. So.
Sarah might have a
question. Sorry, Sarah, you got your hand up, sorry. Are you there, Councillor Graney?
Yep, sorry. Just trying to get my camera back on. Yeah, so I sort of note the comments around the cost of remediating fully or not, as the case may be, and you mentioned that it might be sometimes better to leave things on site. Has the value of the land been looked at all? Because once remediated, would it then not be classified as a hail site at that point, or will it retain its permanent classification as a hail site? Just wondering whether we can offset the costs around that, and then look at potential land sale once remediated, because your value would go up significantly.
So that hasn't been looked at, Councillor Graney, but it's definitely something we will, and that will also form part of the talks with Environment Southland. Is if we do remediate these sites, will we still be required to be on? Will it still be a hail site?
It'll be a DSI to prove that your soil's okay and everything.
Correct.
And you might be able to
Maybe a bit more testing, but it may make the land more valuable.
Yeah, and then it gives us greater opportunity to dispose of that land.
Correct. Yeah. Thanks for that.
Especially since some of these were established in the 1960s and 70s, and when you look at Winton, Te Anau, for example, they'd be potentially seen as prime areas of real estate now.
Yeah, we'll have a look at that.
Whereas some of the others could be seen as being quite hazardous in terms of being close to rivers and so on and so forth.
Councillor Chamberlain again?
Right, just quickly, if we're going to talk to Environment Southland, surely can we get some sort of I know we're going to need resource consent to do some of them, but would they waiver some of that cost too? Going back to Darren's point with we are doing.
Unsure.
The Chamberlain's moved that yes.
So that also forms part of our water sampling that we're doing over the next 2 years. That confirms what consents may or may not be needed.
It'd be nice to think that they might come to the party.
You would.
Well, it's one of those cases where we've got a ratepayer judging the same ratepayer for it. So yeah, I think that could form part of that discussion.
Conversation.
Councillor Wilson.
Well, I guess it follows on from that thought, because I just noticed in the E2 report, I think it's across all of the sites analysed, but the information design requirements includes the requirement of the needing of detailed LiDAR information to a minimum of 1 metre to look at, I guess, the lay of the land, and then also mixing that with hydraulic and hydrograph and historic flow records. Do we have that information available to us across the agencies, and does that kind of fall into beyond just the scope of landfills, into, I guess, like regional spatial planning work that is I guess, a national kind of discussion? Is this an example of where that data is required to deal with this solution, but it's going to need that information from, I guess, ES regarding the river flows and what else can that be applied to. So how is the areas where we need that information to deal with this? Do we have that data access?
So the information is always being updated and improved, including information around climate change. So even the latest flooding information that just happened, starts to continue to build that information for council's knowledge. So we have got access to, they provide, once it becomes public information, if they've gained that information, we've got access to be able to look at their information as well. So, but always that means that when we get new information, we need to reassess, does that actually have an impact on, change the requirements or the outcomes of the report. It might put a particular area higher on a categorisation. It might be that there's coastal erosion or some other issue that's started to become apparent that would then mean that we'd really look at and get that site reassessed. So, the recent flooding has caused that, to have to be looked at again for particular sites. So we'll continue to do that as information comes available. But the better the information, the better the...
Well, if E2 environmental, have they got the scope? If they had access to that LiDAR information, which is publicly available through LINS, and then access to what else they're requiring, being flow records and hydrograph, would they be in a better position to have a bit more detail in the how-to out of this report, or is that not?
So they have got all public information around those things from us, from ES, NIWA, all the relative parties. So everything that they used to make the judgment of that report was to the best of the resources available.
And reporting that's gone prior has been provided so that they've got information. They're not, they've got some other foundation and they can see where that's tracked to from there. So
there has been a couple of situations where E2 have asked for some further information around surveying of rivers. We have approached consultants down here, local surveyors, and they have again said, hey, go talk to ES. Potentially they have all this data. There's no point doubling up on resources. So we are working with Environment Southland to try and make sure we don't double up on anything.
I guess that highlights the importance of having that data there, especially, we're looking at big money here on these things, and having the most accurate data to feed into the process is critical. Councillor Menzies?
Thank you, again, Your Worship. Just a further comment around the earlier comment that was made around although the protection of some of these sites is cheaper, in the long term it may not be, because we're aware the theme through these reports is that the rules keep changing. And there's only one way to protect these sites against being affected by further rules is removal, but that's going to be a cost ahead, and I don't know whether that needs to form part of the long-term plan as well.
Absolutely, does need to be part of that conversation.
Yeah.
Cool. So we've got a very simple recommendation here that we received the report.
Sorry, through you, Your Worship, just one last comment surrounding that conversation around the last 5 minutes. The other thing that we'd consider is the appetite for the Insurance Institute of New Zealand around all of this sort of stuff as well. So they'll have a major influence over what we do in terms of how we insure these particular things from a legislative point of view in particular. And just to remind us that, the insurance bill for the damage in the North Island at the moment is sitting around $4.5 billion, and that is arguably attributed to some of the things around our climate change issues and the way our assets are managed. We just need to be aware of that as well.
Thank you.
So I'll move from the chair that we received the report. Seconded. Councillor Menzies. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? Carried. It might be a good time to have a wee break for a cuppa. So we can come back here in 25 days.
There's a pretty number of insurance at the moment.
He'll be coming because I've just finished talking to him.
Cool.
A couple of photos.
Good question for Karen.
Just, Good morning, everyone, Your Worship, councillors. I'll take the report as read, but the report's purpose is really for council to make a decision on unbudgeted expenditure for infrastructure of up to $62,820 and to accept the supply and install of infrastructure and future maintenance, which should be covered within the ongoing maintenance budgets for the cycle stands and station and potential of Lockheed Dock system and Fiordland. It aligns with Cycling Southland strategy as well, 2016 to 2026, which is improved basic infrastructure to encourage more people to cycle. So there's alignment there. And we're hearing from our communities, particularly in Fiordland, from high school students that are looking for more cycle stands and places to park their bikes. And I've even identified some locations, which is timely too for this report going through our boards and now to council. So the three boards, Ariti, Rakaparama and Fiordland, have recommended to council to accept and approve the unbudgeted expenditure. I'll take any questions. Yeah.
Is there an opportunity for other boards to jump in now and request anything if the awareness sort of comes out, or is this funding already sort of locked in? Or
This funding was a quarter fast turnaround, and it was partnered with Invercargill City Council, and it was for our bigger towns for a starting point, and for the city to encourage people to cycle to and from our main centres. So there's potential for future funding. So we started with our biggest towns first to test that, and then we'll have those. We've got the opportunity to have conversations with Wakapuatahi in partnership with Invercargill City Council around the evaluation of that and feedback from our community.
Thanks, Jared. Councillor Buckwright.
Just one question, Jared. These bike stands, wherever they'll be going in, would we be losing any parking, vehicular parking, where these will be placed? Just that question.
The final locations haven't been confirmed from each board yet, so they're still subject to location. So, if this was approved, we'll go out.
Can you tell me where when we put these in, will we lose any car parking?
No, there's been no discussion on replacing car
Say we are not going to be losing.
Yeah, it's not about replacing car parks with, and that would be, that's on NZ10 and Wakapuatahi roads as well. It's about in the town or around our parks. So, yeah, but ideally somewhere around the main town centre.
It's my understanding that these are fully funded through the application process, so there's actually no cost to community boards. So it would be excellent if other areas have the opportunity to access the fully funded.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Councillor O'Brien and Councillor Keith.
Sorry, through your worship. Yeah, just so it's clear in my mind, under community views and just sort of on the back of this, due to the timing of the original application requirements and resourcing, community views specifically about the bike stands were not sought. And as you've said just now, that you've had some feedback from local schools to the community boards, in particular. Fiordland. I just want to be clear in my mind that we do not run the risk of you know, the public coming back to us and saying, well, we weren't sufficiently consulted on this. So is there a risk associated with that?
I think reflecting on that in terms of Winton, I know in the past had been engaging with schools, and there had been some circumstances recently instilled through the community facilities team due to people putting their bikes on the streets or outside shops. So there is some views around the Winton Township and obviously Fiordland through the school students coming to speak recently, a few months back, but probably not quite as much in Riverland from the community. But it was the original application. What we put forward to Wakatoa was declined, and then through partnering with ICC and they were successful in the cycle stands, we got the opportunity to have some too. So it was quite a quick turnaround.
So are you happy that outside of consultation from schools, you know, the greater community, you're happy with the process in terms of saying, you know,
in terms of Winton and Fiordland, we've got those views already, so we can go back and look at those, and then the board can look at those alongside thinking as well, in terms of, you know, master plans that have been developed in different parks. In terms of Morocco, I know the board were talking about doing a survey out to the community about locations like they're about to do with the partial locations. So I'll, you know, work with that board at the moment, so I'll encourage that as well, and we'll have those conversations. So we still have time to do that.
Thank you, Worship. So no cost to the board, except we have to maintain them.
Yes, that's correct.
There's going forward with the cost that we'll have to be aware of.
Yes, and all of the board reports that was outlined, and we've called it relatively minor for Oriti and Aparima, but depending if the Locky Dock system, which is mentioned in there, goes ahead in Fiordland, that has a potential to have higher yearly maintenance costs, of which the board, why we've put or alternative, or which we're going to be discussing with. So yes, that was widely discussed at community board level. Again, in the report we have said that the general township beautification and maintenance budget should adequately fit routine minor maintenance, obviously targeted maintenance, etc. we can't really plan for. So still on a minor level, it's not considered a large risk to extra additional budgets.
And if I may, another question, quite boring really, you know, like is there any room for some artistic flair? I've seen some very creative sort of ones that stands around that might inspire people.
So yeah, again, with all the three board reports, we took to the board, and for this council, all three boards said similar feedback, and we assured the boards we would do what we could within the timeframes, and as long as we could provide the outcome in terms of how many parking spots for bikes, within budget, within time, we can work within that. Waka kotahi are fine. We have been working with the board chair in Riverton, but we're yet to actually have any local engineers come back with some options. So yeah, sometimes there is a lot of to do something different, but we still do have to meet the timeframes. That was really the only condition. And the costs, obviously, yeah. So we're open to that.
Rob, my questions have been asked, around the creativity of the bike stands. I just think it's a win-win, and thanks so much for the report, and I'm happy to move it.
No further questions? We have a seconder? Oh, sorry, Sarah. Yeah.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a comment for the other councillors is that it does talk about the Tiana Basin Development Review here. Just noting that won't necessarily deliver the answers on location either, and that the community board would want to have another look at it. And the alternative to the Locky Dock was something that the community board wanted to look at, because you could get more bang for your buck by looking at alternatives. i.e. have more just standard multiples, which would be further spread around the town, as opposed to perhaps just having one Locky Dock system in a specific location. And the reason there was so much debate around the community board table was the community board is getting feedback on things like damaged signs and tables and walls just by kids throwing their bikes down in various places around town. So it was felt that it would actually address the goal of Whakatahi as well, in terms of getting more people cycling, and just having more infrastructure for that biking community. So that's why there was some pushback on the Locky Dock, but we were also, or the board was also very mindful that they didn't want to look the gift horse in the mouth either, but that there is some discussion that's needed with Whakatahi on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. So it's been moved by Councillor Ravenclaw. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Fraser. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Everybody good? Thanks, Andy. Thank you very much. Okay, so we now have 7.8, which is on page 301, which is the Open Spaces Project updating future approach. Angie and John,
Good morning, Your Worship and Councillors. Apologies from Mark and Jenny, who would usually be Angie's support crew, but you're stuck with me today. Just a few things to introduce. I think it's appropriate to acknowledge there may have been some process issues in dealing with open spaces projects in recent times. But we're trying our very hardest to simplify things by taking the approach which has probably gone from the sublime to the ridiculous, where we had a huge report trying to cover a multitude of things, and now we've narrowed it down to a small report. And you'll see that this report's now focused on the projects we plan to deliver in the current year, 23-24. Section 10, the table you've got there, outlines what's already committed, and that totals 658,000. And it shows two projects totaling 40,000, but as yet uncommitted, some savings of about 290. Now, committed means the work is either contracted, granted, or work is well underway already. Uncommitted means work hasn't started at all. And so we've got that table. Everything else will be dealt with through the LTP deliberations. So the process there is very, very clear. We're just trying to address what's in front of us now. Now there's one, not maybe call it an anomaly, but I'll see if I can get this right. Lumsden was committed in that it went through a procurement process last year via the project delivery team, but it hasn't progressed to delivery because there's a bit of confusion around the funding. Now, Angie's sitting here ready to answer detailed questions on everything. That's all I've said by way of introduction.
Thank you for that, Jane. Just a question from me for a start, just around because there's been a lot of confusion from this process about where the funds are coming from, and originally a lot of people, including myself, believed that we already rated for this money and it was sitting there in a bucket ready to go. So, and then it's come out that these are loan funded. So are all of these costs loan funded going forward?
So the open space project, as we've referred to it, going forward. So this is the last, because we're going to take the rest through the LTP and the AMPs, and Finance are going to support us to discuss if that money, how that money gets applied, or how that funding for future projects gets applied. But this 23-24 year is still within that original capital development strategic fund as it was in the 2018 LTP, which is loan funded.
Because just what I'm sort of flagging from my point of view is the regional activator and the Spaces and Places contract, which is sort of an operational activity, and I'd be reluctant for that to be loan funding your sort of general day-to-day operational. Yeah, I think the comment around the process over probably the last 10 years has been an interesting one, for want of a better word. But, yeah, I'll open up to the floor for questions. Councillor Buckland.
Clause F on page 303, please. I noticed on, I think it was a 5th July meeting, when I had asked about how, why are we doing a separate partnership? So is this now just the existing one that we have as a matter of course with the Amarama? Or are we still doing a separate explicit one here?
So I missed the number, sorry, Councillor.
This is clause F, page 303. Thank you.
So is that relating to that $50,000?
Yeah, it is the existing, because the last time we had questioned about, so is this a separate explicit one?
So it's still tied to the partnership agreement, but the partnership agreement clearly defines activities that are within the defined parameters of what is the baseline, I guess, funding element of the partnership agreement, and then it defines what sits outside the partnership agreement. And so I actually do have that here. So for example, the Matariki project that we're undertaking as our main project this year, and with that partnership, including the translation and design services, is clearly defined in the partnership agreement as funding is not intended to be covered. Requests associated with larger scale projects that require specific or additional resources, that's the key one. This is a large scale project that has never been defined as fitting within the partnership agreement. Still fits within the parameters of the agreement of how we operate, how we work, but it's never fitted within the funding elements of it, which is why in the original project, I think Louise spoke to that a little bit about what we used to refer to as the design panel, where we had targeted some funding, but because the project had fallen behind and that had never launched, we're in a position where we still have to proceed and utilise the expertise and give...
If I may repeat my question here, because I'm not getting what I'm asking for. On 5th of July, we had discussed that you were saying the entire 5.5 million, we need to do a separate partnership for open spaces project. And I had questioned then that when we already have an understanding with the Amarama, are we now still pursuing a separate partnership here?
No, so we are still within the same partnership agreement.
Still within, right. Clause number G here, consider the South Sea project as a part of the draft of the long-term plan. So if it goes into the long-term plan, who funds this then?
So all the reason that's in this report is because, of course, it was in the table report, and because we've had a rethink about how we're going to proceed with the open spaces work, that is just acknowledging that we are no longer trying to fund South Sea Spray in any way through this funding, and that the appropriate way is through our normal funding applications through the LTP and the AMP. So those discussions will happen through the AMP and the LTP.
We are not seeking external grants for this?
Sorry?
Does this mean this is not going to be ratepayer funded?
No, what I'm saying is it's not going to be within the Open Spaces project, which this report's about today, and that the appropriate discussion for that funding is within the LTP and the AMP process.
Did Darren speak to that? I think he's wanting to.
Yeah, I think I can speak to that, and I was quite surprised to see that was still in here, and it was my understanding that there was no desire to seek any LTP funding. There's an application to receive $20,000 grant from ward funding, which would be the only council funding towards the project. So I would quite like to see either a G removed or G changed to say there will be no funding from the long-term plan. But but to be realistic, there is a request to the ward fund that's currently before the board for 20,000 of the 180 fund.
Which is something that we can do today as part of the recommendation, so that's not in front of us.
I looked into this because I saw this in the long-term plan. So this is written here that I assume that this is, coming to council for funding. But then I went and looked at the original board's minutes for last week, and it says that after discussion, Chair Smith requested that the board lay the report on the table to enable members to consider this matter more. So they have not yet agreed.
No, it's on the table still.
It's on the table.
So that's a proposal.
So that's a proposal for the 20,000 from ward reserve.
So that's not a long-term plan process or anything to do with this. It was a separate request for the already ward reserve, so outside of all of this.
It's my understanding that the rest of the project will be funded from external funders, and that's well in the process of being ticked off. And so that other funding is.
What I looked at, I'll just put that here, even though it's not being loan funded, not being internally funded. I looked at the fact that the report said that, this organization, Southseas Stray, is a charity. Looking at the charities commission page, they registered as a charity last year. Their turnover has gone up from 55,000 to 325 or some such thing. It's gone up 6 times in a year. And I mean, I have no problem if someone found that there's, funding available and they're making the business work like this. But I would have never agreed that, this is private enterprise, regardless of whether they are classified as a charity or not. Our ratepayers fund anything. So I am glad this is out of the long-term plan project, and this is going to be completely.
And I guess the comment would be that we actually use a lot of private enterprise to deliver our outcomes. All our rating contractors, etc. And the thing for us to look at is what outcome are we getting, and not the process. And so I don't think anybody's looking at this as that we're supporting a charity. We're looking at an outcome of artistic and betterment for the community. So.
I think getting that clarification today is going to be really vital for everyone to get on understanding of how it's getting funded or how it's not getting funded in this case. And yeah, I think we do need to look at that. Are you thinking, Councillor Blackbright?
I'm very grateful that this is no longer being funded by the ratepayers. Thank you.
Just a follow-up question from Councillor Blackbright. With that term minimum funding of 50k in there, can that be incorporated into the 395 if it's part of that project, or do we need that separate line, or is it completely separate to that actual?
The very real danger of incorporating that within that is diluting the outputs of that project, of which both TIF, iwi and ourselves are committed to. That budget was already had a decrease when the TIF application came through, so even though we had indicated some of those costs with the application, through Simon Marianne, our project lead, the original application lost about 60,000. So yeah, we risk diluting and taking out other parts of that, and risk not delivering on the entire project, which obviously has a risk element to the TIF funding as well. So it's not impossible, but it's certainly not the preferred option.
I just wonder if, given the tight constraints that we're in at the moment, it might be worth looking at with the significant size of that project in the scheme of
Thank you. Yes, that was just a question I had in relation to this as well, because it would seem that because my understanding to TIF, it was a joint application with Ngāi Tahu and ourselves through to TIF.
So it was identified as a partnership application, but it was our application. So it was Southland
jointly with them, and so there was no aspect within those projected costs that enabled funding to occur for ongoing liaison.
That's within the partnership agreement. It was definitely outlined within the TIF application funding that there would be some costs associated to the iwi knowledge and expertise and navigating all of that. But at the same time, you have to recognise when that application came through council was also when this project was in its in that formative zone, where there was also going to be a design panel, which was going to be the separately funded partnership agreement. Now, of course, with that gone and hadn't come to formulation, again, we run the risk of having our partners through Te Ao Marama, but obviously all the Ngāka who are participating in that have worked for a good year or so and contributed in a lot of time, a lot of energy and a lot of knowledge without any compensation so far. So this is seen as the best way to fund that. And yeah, we've also saved some funding on that too, because originally, help me out Louise, I think we tagged about 80k for the design panel model, whereas this one, as you can see, we're only tagging 50k. So
it's very hard to comment without seeing the breakdown of the budget within this project. But my expectation would have been that that's if the overall application was reduced by 60,000, then that's adjusted within that total budget, as opposed to what I understand you're saying, adding another 50,000 on top of the 395 that's already there.
Yeah, it was already tagged as part of the design panel within the open spaces project, but we're just now saying that because this year, because of resourcing and because of we're trying to make the program of delivery this year smaller because of that actually we're not going to be able to deliver on that. So we've just tagged that funding to that contribution without taking it out of the project.
Because confused by that, but if that funding was to go towards the design panel work and we've no longer got the design panel operating, then I would think the 50,000 is no longer needed.
Yeah, if the design panel wasn't a consideration, again, I didn't write the application, that was Simon, and I'm not sure if he's here today, but if, I guess, the design panel and the open space project bones weren't in place when the application was made, more funding would have been potentially asked to be put in the application. There's a lot of moving parts, obviously, as we've all acknowledged, but that is why, as of today, that's why we've got that in the delivery.
Yes, well, I guess my comment would be that there's a budget for the Matariki project, and that living within that is probably what I would be recommending, rather than adding onto it, given the budget that's already there for it. But we may be talking at cross purposes, because I'm very confused between the tabled report and this recent report, which seems to have changed the way forward, and I'm unclear about the $5 million and how that's going to be used in the future. We're changing the way that it's operating, as it has done in the past. And I'm unclear about, from that $5 million that was set aside back in 2018, was it, or 2014, what's already been spent of that, which I would think would be the amount, and where we're going ahead in the future years. I don't find that clarity in the report. Perhaps you're able to.
Yeah. So as James said earlier, yes, this has taken a big U-turn in terms of taking on the feedback from the last report, realising that, yes, from 2018, but tied to the 2014 strategy, there is a long history. And every time we are continuing down that path, it was very, very clear that there was a lot of confusion. So what this report is just trying to do is focus on just this year's delivery, also showing savings, and then giving the council confidence that through the AMP and the LTP process, this table have the decisions of what happens to that funding, if anything, going forward. So we are basically separating this year's delivery, because we are in it and we are doing, to the rest of the open space activity. We're also dropping the project, as it said in the report, because that's creating confusion. So we are going to keep delivering the open spaces activity in the future, but under whatever budgets that are approved through the LTP process. This is the last year that the open spaces project funding isn't this hybrid of the way we used to do it to the way we're going to be doing it. So the control was actually going to be around this table and all those discussions through the AMP and the LT process. This last table was the last set of delivery.
Sorry, just one more question, but I remain confused, but that's probably just me, because I understood there was going to be an application process from the community to access $50,000 to undertake projects. And that process was outlined in the 5th of July document, and yet we have $100,000 approved for the Lumsden playground. So I'm unsure what was the process around the allocation of $100,000 when we were still yet to confirm the application process from communities for part of that $5 million.
So what you will see missing in the, what you now see is committed work and uncommitted work. In the tabled report you would have seen we had activation and management, strategic projects and community fund. So the strategic projects, the Lumsden 100,000 as per the in section in paragraph 5 of the new report, that was always tagged as a strategic project based on the fact that Lumsden is a strategic destination site, based on that as per our strategy, the accessibility and nature play options, which are quite widely seen across our district, needed to have a district-funded approach to lift that up. And basically because of timing and also because of the delegation of how the funding was applied previously, that was always in the strategic projects category within this budget, within the 987,000 for this financial year. The 200,000 that was dedicated out of that 987 to community project fund is something that with this new iteration of the report we have dropped out. And we've dropped that out of that because we hadn't yet launched it. There was still quite a bit of confusion or different approaches that were raised around the table, and also because of our directive to cut funding, and that we can, again, through the activity management plan or the LTP, if this council wishes to, we can bring those kind of community projects back around the table. But this report today, the retabling, is just focusing on this financial year delivery.
So the strategic projects never came to council for...
Previously it was at a GM. It was delegated based on whether it was meeting the outcomes of our strategic direction, which is through our strategy, and we would report on what had been delivered. So the spends in 2021-22 and 22-23 were spends based on GM delegation and delivery, and then report to council.
Well, I guess that goes back to that meeting from last Triennium, I think in 2021, where that process, and I guess that's always me where the confusion started, and I think through good intentions, I'm not questioning the intentions, but just I think we need to take a lesson here in the process and where we've landed today, and the fact that we're all still quite confused, even with the second report in front of us. I think the best thing we can do from this is to learn from what's happened from 2014. I mean, it's nearly been 10 years, and it was called a strategic project back then, but it's been a bit of a mess. But Councillor O'Brien?
Just sort of following on from that Lumsden conversation, just so it's clear in my mind, around the pre-project being tagged to receive 100,000, matching the amount of local funding and better off funding. Obviously, when I have my next meeting with those guys, they'll be asking questions around that, saying, fly the flag for us, we want that funding, and ultimately it'll come to the table and we'll make a decision around that. Just so I've got a bit of clarity, and you may not be able to answer this question or not, is that saying, when you say it's been tagged to receive that 100K, can you just clarify what that means? Does that mean that it will have that 100K because it's a project or not?
Are you asking me originally when it was tagged, or now as if this report is right now? Yes. Right now, it is sitting within the committed work because it has gone through there. Based on the old way, it was committed. The only reason that's been delayed is because of the recent confusion, and we've slowed things down. But it still absolutely meets the strategic outcomes for our open spaces strategy, and it still meets the level of which brings it to an important outcome for our communities in regards to a strategic destination and the accessibility play and the potential nature play options that will come through that procurement. So as I understand it, I'm not sure if there's anyone from PDD today, but project delivery team, what they've had to try and do since this confusion and this change of applying the funding is basically strip as much out of the project as they can post-procurement, which means that our district will lose all the accessibility and nature play components of that project. And because in the strategy, which is what the district funding is supposed to be uplifting, those are the elements that it talks about. That's why it's still sitting in committed funds.
I guess the board chair, when he presented to council a couple of meetings ago, highlighted the concern from the board that they'd followed the process to get this to where it was, and he sort of made his point quite clear that they'd be a bit upset if this was to sort of take a backward step when they've followed it, and what they believed at the time was a fair process that was put in place. So I guess that's the risk of kind of doing anything with that now. but I guess the decision is ultimately with that table today to either carry on with that committed funding or to do the opposite. Is there any, Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, the Lumsden Playground, I'm just thinking back to sitting here a few meetings ago and raising that concern. I've noted that it was back in the August of 2022 first edition, it was listed as a project in Northern. Back then it was described as a recreation reserve playground equipment replacement. And then in this report, it's a Lumsden Strategic Destination Playground Project with accessibility contribution to local scope. So the change of description is confusing enough. To me, you meant... I'm still so confused on what open spaces strategy is, let alone what open spaces budgeting is. But we can't also pull back on committed projects that are already, communities have waited this long, especially when Better Off funding's also been introduced to the play. So in saying that, there's also the same town has other concerns and needs, which supposedly, I don't understand the open spaces strategy, but it also refers to sometimes waterways and accessibility and stormwater and that kind of thing playing into open spaces, not just recreation. So but I think we need to deliver on what's committed, but strip apart the strategy going forward and into the LTP, because the strategy is in place. And an example of what I've observed from the Ardluster Community Board is there's a strategy in place, and all of a sudden Taylor Park development came up as a proposed LTP project, and the Community Board sitting there going, this is not anything that's been asked for by the community. How is this? And maybe it's an identified strategic destination, I'm not sure, but it's not reflective of what the community's wanted. Meanwhile, the community's sitting there going, when can we start applying for our community funding out of the Open Spaces project? That's what we're waiting on. So, yeah, all I'm saying is I'm confused.
Jane, did you want
Yeah, we acknowledge the confusion, and I think you see in paragraph 8, we're talking about needing to go, I doesn't quite say back to basics, but focus on the strategic work, update documents, policies, plans, reserve management plans, and make sure the direction's clear and work through it with you. So it's not only you that's confused.
Okay.
And I think that the importance that's getting highlighted to me here is basically resetting this whole piece of work and doing that through the appropriate channels, which I agree is the long-term plan.
Yeah.
But as Councillor Wilson just pointed out, we do have a live work stream in front of us that we have to sort of have a look at. So is there anyone else want to Councillor?
Just a couple of observations here, no question as such. You know, in July we had said that out of the funding it's split into 18% community and 60% strategic projects fund and 22% activation and management. If we are not kept abreast of what is a big chunk, 60% of the funding, we're going to end up confused around this table, as was in July. The other thing I'll make a note of is, and this might just be omission, but we've had at least 4 references over the last 18 months to Open Spaces project in the first edition, 2 specific articles on the Matariki Pillars project, and then a press release from Chris Chilton, this was again in July, about what this is going to cost. And I had asked that time also, sometime the total cost needs to be put in there, because just saying co-funded gives people an idea this is 370,000. This is close to 800,000, and you know, we walk into the funding thing, but we don't realize how much of that is actually going to be coming from the community. The press release is an issue I had highlighted in July. I still haven't heard back. What came to us around the council table differed from what went in staff, and the staff article again mentioned a figure of 370 or some such. That's what the funding has come through. That does not give the correct impression. It looks like, I'm pretty sure there'll be quite a few people surprised when it actually turns up to be closer to 800,000. And that is something we need to keep in mind, especially as we see our ratepayers going through this cost of living crisis, that we are as transparent, as open as possible here. And that would also help quite a few of us around the council table, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Just that.
Thanks, Councillor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Two of these PO for Matariki are sitting within ICC territory. So is there contribution on top of this 395, or are we invoicing ICC for their portion of the two PO?
Thank you for that question, because it is a great clarification. The 10 sites for the PO is very important regarding the true reflection of Matariki, including of Puanga down here, and including doing it right. But we only have 8 sites within STC, and only 8 sites are going to be funded using any of our ratepayer funding, and we are still just awaiting to receive the letter, but I've been having conversations through Te Amarama that they will put in writing in association with ICC that Bluff, the 9th site within the TIF application was mentioned, but Simon is going to work with TIF after we receive that letter formally, which we've had the verbal assurance of, because the Bluff site, for example, is going to be part of their own tourism master plan activation within Motupuhui. Again, it's not for me to speak to, but we've been very clear at saying, can you just give us assurance that because of that and because of the delays, that all of the costs to still meet and feed into our project are going to be met locally, and that is being assured. We're just going to get that in writing. So I can assure you that that even though there's 10 sites that are going to be delivered, 1 in Bluff and 1 in Invercargill, that will feed into the wider project, only 8 are within our area, and only those 8 are receiving the TIF funding and any STC ratepayer funding. Including Great Stone.
Have to return any of the funding because we're delivering on 8 PO, not 10.
No, because we are delivering on 10. Some of them are just going to be later in the track, because that's the way that ICC or iwi or the appropriate urunaka for those sites are dealing with that. And yeah, the TIF, the funders are aware, or like I said, we're still waiting on a couple of letters to then tie up those loose ends. But no, we are not going to have to. And we've already been having some of those discussions. That was always highlighted as some of them might be staged because it was a multi-party situation, and we were a lot more ready than what some of the other master plan projects, especially in Bluff, were. There is one cost that has been met in regards to Bluff. We paid a bulk invoice in regards to the stage 1 signs. We are on charging that to Te Amarama, who is, they're going to cover that for the Bluff sign, because again, we all acknowledge that we wouldn't, we haven't and we won't spend SDC funding on outside of our district.
So this funding is actually for 8 PO, not 10. Is that what you're
saying? All the PO, it's for the shelter and the toilets. So there's 2 shelters within this project, one in Te Anau, one at Soap Point, and the toilet at Soap Point. So it's inclusive of everything involved in the delivery of the wider project.
Including Invercargill's too?
No funding within Invercargill. So it's for the 8 PO and the added supporting infrastructure.
So looking at the recommendations here, and I think if we go back to the start with G and Councillor Fraser's comments around that, if I've read the room right, I'd be suggesting that we're saying that we are removing the South Sea project from this and the long-term plan. Is that Councillor Fraser? And then just looking at the other part that we've discussed, which is that $50,000 and potentially incorporating that into the 395, is there an appetite to look at doing that, or are we comfortable with as it stands on the report? We're comfortable with as it stands, or we want to?
Perhaps it's just clarity around the 50,000. Is that purely related to the Matariki wayfinding project, or is this going to be an annual cost in relation to open spaces?
It's just for this financial year, because the Matariki project sits outside of the partnership agreement, and we've been undertaking that for just over a year.
My views remain the same as I said earlier around it needs to be, from my view, incorporated within the total funding for the wayfinding project.
Is that a shared view around the table? get some kind of indication, or
Is that okay considering the TIF funding within the scope of the project?
I guess one thing that we could do is suggest that it gets looked at if we can incorporate that in there, rather than trying to do a black and white sort of decision today without that knowledge. So if we maybe put in an H to say that if we can incorporate the 50 into the original TIF application. I'm sure we'll word that a lot better than I just did. Councillor Keast?
Just for clarification, so is what we're asking with that the 50,000 be incorporated into the existing budget? Because I think we've heard that it's not, and I think that it was.
Well, I think it's coming afterwards, but I think the discussion today is around can we actually do it? Sorry, Jane.
Others know more about it than me, but I would suggest that we investigate that, because if it goes in there, something else will have to come out.
I think that it's tight enough at the moment.
Yeah, so
I think that we can't expect our partners to fund it maybe.
So if we agree to investigate that $50,000.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. I'm not expecting that to be done for free. I'm looking at the overall budget and understanding that there's still a tender process around completing the code, that there's an opportunity then to look at that.
So, and we will investigate, then what? Do we come back and say, yes, we can put it in, but we'll have to take this out, or?
Yeah, but if we can report the outcome from that investigation back to council.
And report the outcome from back to council, okay.
Did you want to speak?
Thank you. I was just wondering whether, rather than a separate report back, whether you might cover it by just in that resolution saying up to 50,000, subject to seeing if it could be incorporated, so that it's capped and it's clearly implied that it's not given. But I also acknowledge that there is work to be done, and it's an important project, so ultimately the cost will be borne somewhere. Council will.
So how do we sit with that? Do we want to come back to council? Are we happy with the investigation? Just go through. Councillor King?
I'm happy for if it can be incorporated somewhere within the project, that we just get reported onto us. But yeah, the Chief Executive's suggestion of up to
Everyone else happy with that? So what have you got there?
Well, if I'm going down the right track, agree that up to $50,000 be incorporated. $50,000 budgeted. Incorporated as part of the variation to the partnership agreement with Marama Incorporated for work additional outside current program deliverables and projects. Have I got that right?
Sorry, don't just try that again, sorry.
Agree that up to $50,000 budgeted, agree that up to $50,000 be incorporated as part of the variation to the partnership agreement with Marama for work / additional / outside current per annum deliverables and projects.
I think we agree to investigate if the $50,000 can be incorporated into the, or agree to investigate up to $50,000 can be incorporated into the existing project cost of $395. Councillor Menzies?
just to give Fiona some more time to draft it. Just another question. There's a decision required on the uncommitted work as well. Is that required today, or is that a decision that's going to be made within the budget parameters, because we haven't got any information in this report to outline what the Community Health and Safety Roadshow is, and Codify Reach, where that sits and a request for increased funding to align with the work. So it's an increase from 5K to 20,000, but we haven't got any information, or have I missed it?
No, I don't think we do. We don't have a motion, recommendation there for those in line.
Yes, but it says a decision required.
So, yeah, I can definitely speak to that. So the change between the committed and the uncommitted was just trying to transparently show the council what work could realistically be stopped if you wanted to put that $40,000 to add into the already saved $289,000. And so, but these have always been, we've got a lot of potentially uncommitted work, but these were some of the pieces that we had in the original program plan for this year that we hadn't quite started. So I'll talk to both of them. So the Community Health and Safety Roadshow is a program we as a team wanted to incorporate for volunteer groups that want to and that we want to do work on council land to help the enhancements of open spaces, whether it be planting, pest control, working bees or infrastructure improvements. We always support this, we currently do that, but we've got to ensure that it's conducted safely and meets the legislative requirements because we are the PCBU. And currently, large amounts of resource across different teams, including community facilities, sometimes our health and safety team, project delivery team, our community partnership team. We're doing that in a very reactive and an effective way. So that was always tagged to fit within the open spaces funding, simply because it ties into a lot of the open spaces work predominantly, to enable a roadshow project, which essentially would take a roadshow around all of our communities to invite those groups, those individuals, those people that help us to go along and have that done in a planned, proactive way. That provides ongoing support that isn't just reliant on individual staff members doing that. So that's what that project is.
So I think that's a good piece of work that is probably will be in demand. A lot of even community boards have suggested that. Could that be potentially funded out of the District Ops Reserve rather than coming into this piece and potentially being loan funded when we've got existing reserves in place now that could actually enable this piece of work to carry on? Because I think it's a good piece of work, but I don't see how it fits into the conversation today, given what we're changing around the open spaces, and to drag that into the long-term plan. I think we'd be pushing it ahead. So if everyone supports that piece of work, we look at a different budget to actually fund that from.
Probably not the best person to speak to that. I wonder if Anne can.
Is it a no?
I'm here. I need to go away and do some more work on that before I can.
Yeah. So I guess do both of those pieces of work actually come back to us at because I think we need more clarity around it.
And would you like me to speak to Corfu Reach, or have you made that?
Well, you can speak to it, but I think that actually forms part of the same decision as that one. So I think we could bring that back.
That would be good.
Sorry, what was that, Councillor?
Through you, Rob. An update would be good on this funding around Kopo Reach, the uncommitted funding, to see where we're at, just so we're aware of where the reach is sitting.
So you're asking an update to be done now?
Yeah,
or
Angie wants.
I just wonder whether the relevance of this actual particular item, I think if we have an update at the time when we have that report coming through about the funding, it might be a more appropriate time to address it, unless people want to hear that.
Sure. That would be fine. And I wonder if when that comes back, we could have further clarification on the 5 million. What's been spent already, and is there intention to access that through loan funding in the future, and for what?
My understanding of that future 5 million is it's basically been wrapped up into the long term. So it's basically finished. So I think that's part of the.
How much
There's no more 5 million ahead to access. Anything comes forward as part of discussion. Okay. Thank you.
Cool. So we've got our recommendations here with a new G, which is removing the South Sea Spray project from the long-term plan and from open spaces. And
yeah, there's the G.
have we got that behind me? Cool.
Just remove, and then the new H.
So is everyone comfortable with A through to H?
Clarification on the South Spray project. Was that, can you tell me, or anybody tell me whether that was just as a future option that, say if it went to, because obviously talking about it as 23, 24, 34 long-term plan, was that just to incorporate it in as a potential where a township was actually doing Southland spray? Because we've, you know, the one that's in front of us now is going to be completed before the long-term plan, so it's obviously not applying to that at all. But is it just that we are actually removing any potential for a future South Sea spray project in another township to come to it?
My understanding is this had come through for the Ariti one as part of the open spaces in July, and it had been moved as part of that into the long-term plan. So I don't think it's a generic one. I think it was that particular project. And going by the conversation at the start, I think it's a good idea to.
Should that be
Specified to remove the Winton?
Yeah, that's a good. Just to put that clarity in.
How?
The Ariti, the South Sea Spray project for Ariti.
Community board. Just one more thing, I've just remembered looking at my notes. We had discussed that in July, that there was, how much was available in the better off funding to help the four Ranungas prepare their application for round 2, I think 130,000, and there's no round 2 happening. So what happened to the 130,000? Because when I look at this 50,000, to be very, very frank and candid, it seems to me we agreed, because that time in July when we were asking you, and we were told at the end that the partnership allows for an extra FTE or, you know, staff help being given to the Rungas. This looks like to me we've done away with that. So, you know, there was a bit of resistance on that one. We swapped it with the $50,000. It is pretty much, you know, we've not given them a FT, but we given an additional 50,000. What happened to that money that came for the round 2 funding to help them with their application?
So I'm not directly involved in better off funding, so I can't really answer that, but my understanding is that's tied in with the partnership agreement.
So there's that, it was over 100,000, and the key purpose of it stated in the application for better off funding was to help them prepare their application for round 2.
Is that something that staff can get back to us on because that's quite a valid question around because that better funding is most likely not going to continue. We don't actually know.
No, there's no round 2 because that was scrapped.
Yeah,
nothing's coming there. Sorry, it's not coming yet.
Absolutely, it's appropriate for us to get back to you in regards to that. The funding was.
I just save on this money, you know. There's a big amount lying there.
Yep, happy to get back on that because there is a need to communicate with the grantors of the better off funding anyway because that tranche 2 isn't occurring as you've highlighted. So if we can adjust that, then that's what we'll do, similar to what we did with the boat, with the work that occurred up in Tiano, sorry.
You've been in Auckland, have you?
I have been in Auckland, can you tell?
Just with the new H, is that clear that this is relating to the Matariki work?
I think we're just amending that at the moment. Just be with us.
Because that last
back to council.
We got the applications from reading up to.
Cool. So that will pop up behind us in 2 seconds if it's not there already. How does that look, Councillor?
Well, it refers to current per annum deliverables and projects, which is PIRA. We're talking specifically about the Matariki project.
Just add after 50,000.
And it's a 1.
We can still keep that and investigate them. Go to the incorporating up to $50,000 for the Matariki project. So just up to 50,000 for the variations. Council, or you still?
So I just got the application, so we're taking up $50,000 in the current year as part of the creation of the partnership. For the Matariki project as part of the variation to the partnership agreement, yeah.
Councillor Wilson?
It'd be interesting, just for context, at some point to get an update on that, on the Matariki project, including the initial application, because it's so far down the line now that
it's cost two councils, so
yeah. And I guess my question would be: was Te Ao Marama involved in the application process, or was this a SDC application for TIF funding with intent to engage with Te Ao Marama after the project was away?
It was that second one. The latter, yes.
They provided a letter of support.
They provided a letter of support. Council made the application for better off funding.
Is there the opportunity in future to, I guess, have a bit more detail co-designed together before applying for funding, so that it doesn't turn around into kind of retrospectively trying to fix these things?
Typically, that's how we would work. I guess the issue in this case was the TIF funding came up, and it had usually there's something like we can predict what might be coming. It might be something around tourism, so it might be toilets and other things that we have projects that are already prepared for. This particular one was specifically, one of the criteria was for Matariki, because it was the first public holiday, and so the council and I guess the communication that had happened didn't quite, and it was quite a rushed proposal. Yes, we had talked about possibility of toilets at the slope and shelters and different things. We were able to bring that together into one application for the TIF funding, but unfortunately there wasn't enough time to clarify exactly where the sites were going to be for the Matariki Po and those things, so there was going to be some additional communication with Te Ao Marama required. I guess the design component was maybe a piece that was potentially missed from that when we were racing to put that application together.
Speaks to more collaboration going forward in terms of step one. It's a great successful application, receiving $400,000 of government funding and co-funded $400,000 from ratepayer, I imagine is the context of it. But if it then adds, because it wasn't completely tweaked out in the early stages, if that then turns into $450,000 of co-funding, that's where it starts to, there's other projects historically that you could say were sparked by a good successful application, but then turn into a out of control. It's that initial first stage planning and making sure that the right people are together coming up with that plan to get a true scope of what the plan is and what the delivery is going to look like. It would take away from a lot of this confusion.
Getting the right foundations on it. Cool, so Fiona's been typing away in the background and it looks like we've landed on is someone in a position to move A through to H. Thank you, Councillor Rutherford, and seconded by Councillor Fraser. If there's no further discussion, I will put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Anybody against? Carried. Very, I suspected there was going to be some good discussion on that one, and there certainly was. And it's probably an opportune time to strike some colours. Pop back here just after one.
Destination slower.
We'll start cut here.
It's just unfortunately got such a long history of court.
Getting well through the agenda now. And I believe Jane Parfitt or myself.
I can do that, yep.
So Jane Parfitt and myself probably. Sorry, my computer's just gone up.
just by way of a short introduction, I think this is a fairly standard report. Many councils part of the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs. It's not a new thing. And I think our Mayor is taking the initiative to join in. The details are there. We don't have the capability within staff to support this, hence the recommendation that we subcontract to Great South. The agreement between us and LGNZ is a standard agreement, same as every other council, that allows subcontracting to take place. And I guess we're asking council to support the Mayor's recommendation that we enter into a contract with LGNZ, Mayor's Task Force for Jobs, for up to 2 years. I think, Your Worship, we're a little behind getting the agreement in place, so it may not be a full 2 years. That'll be part of the negotiations. This information, if you follow the link, tells you about it. And we thought there was a natural fit with Great South because of the work they're already doing.
Thank you, Jane. And yeah, I can just add to that, like, what I've seen talking to fellow mayors up and down the country, this has been incredibly successful and a good partnership between MSD and councils to get our youth, they're called NEETs, which I keep forgetting the acronym. Employment Educational Training. So, and I think with Great South's work that they've already been doing and the youth futures and that kind of work, we've got the natural fit. So it just kind of makes sense to me as the case.
Yes, quite a number of years ago, I used to be the alternate for years. And yes, it just seems to have fallen off, but my vote futures on that makes me think this is a really good fit. So I think this is coming back to life again, and happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, following up on that, the partnership with Te Rekinga as well, I think it's quite important and links through to I guess as a minor shareholder of Great South as well, or they have that relationship through SIT, and that I think that adds to it being a good fit.
Yeah, that certainly is. That and the existing relationships with the employment sector as well from Councillor Buckroyd.
I just following from what Councillor Keys said, you said this is coming back to life. So was the Great South work in absence of this being stopped, or will that be complementary?
Complementary, I think. The Great South work wasn't going through the employment stage, so it was helping the kids get ready for employment. So this is basically adding another layer in to actually get them placed into jobs. So I think the existing work, I mean, it's up to Great South, obviously, is what they're doing. But
I would sort of worry about what Councillor Wilson said about Te Rekinga. Going by what's coming in the news from that quarter is just not really good right now. The fortunes of that mega polytechnic are going. So yeah, he's hoping things turn for the better there.
Well, given the local MP and her involvement,
yes.
I think that'll be going through some changes. Yeah. Councillor Menzies.
I'm happy to second this, and it offers significant opportunities for our young people in this area who may well otherwise be isolated by distance, and the service will come to them. So, good to see it in place.
Is it measurable? How do you measure success on this one?
Yeah, so it's actually the outcomes. It's a monthly report back for the MSD on the outcomes of how many have been placed into employment, and for a time frame of more than 90 days as well. So yeah, it's directly measurable, and the funding depends on those measurements as well.
That's all set out in the contract. You don't get the funding if you're not getting the outcome.
I had a good chat with for for quite a while, and they were exceeding all of their expectations since day dot. So they've employed a specific person to actually do it. And the initial discussions were going to be a joint initiative between Gore and ourselves, and then Gore went out and did their own thing, and that sort of broke that down. So that's part of the reason why this is being delayed a bit. It's supposed to be the 1st of July, as the initial framing of it was a shared sort of service between the three councils. But I think what we've landed with is going to be a really good outcome. Councillor Wilson?
Right, actually, sorry.
Cool, so we've had it moved and we've had it seconded, and if there's no further discussion, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you. All those against? That's carried. Thank you, Jane, and thanks to Great South for their contribution to the work as well. Rightio, on to 7.10, the approval of the variation of the Whakamana Te Waituna Charitable Trust Deed. Page 427 of your agenda.
Kia ora, Mayor and councillors. The purpose of this report is to seek approval of council for the variation to the Whakamana Te Waituna Charitable Trust Deed. This variation is to alter the number of trustees. You may recall in June a report came to council requesting in advance a decision regarding who would be the continuing trustee in the event that it was reduced from 2 to 1 trustee for Southland District Council. So, and at that time it was resolved that Julie, Councillor Keast, would continue as trustee on behalf of Southland District Council. So this is now the formal part of it, which is a requirement for the consent of the variation. I have listed on the front page of the report, you'll see the change to all of the trustees. If you would like me to detail that, I can. Okay. So Environment Southland will appoint 1 trustee where it was previously 2 trustees. Southland District Council will appoint 1 trustee, previously 2 trustees. The number of independent trustees will reduce from 1 where it was previously 3, and the minimum number of trustees will reduce to 6. It was previously 10. The purpose of the reduction of the trustees, as you may recall, was because the trust is moving to a care and maintenance period, and while it is developing its phase 2 work streams, it doesn't require so many trustees and will be easier to operate during this period with a reduced number of trustees. I think that is probably enough. If you have any questions.
Thank you. You didn't have any comments on it all, Councillor Keast?
Just really reiterating Carla's idea that it's we're putting through the first 5-year work program, and now it's with getting some successes in that, and and so it's a reset now to see where it goes to from here. There's a few more projects still running through for various reasons, but
I guess just noting once again the acknowledgement that Councillor Duffy got, and a thank you from that trust for all the work that he had put in as well. Questions, Councillor Wilson?
Just checking what the work process would be as far as updating the local government statement, which lists all council organisations, and it would currently say 2 councillors, so I guess delegating who does that update of that document.
Well, that'll be a live, I guess it's a live document as part of your work stream, Mikhail, with this.
That would be updated by somebody in my team.
Someone in a position to move A through to F? Thank you, Councillor Vaporai. Councillor Menzies? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against, your answer will be carried. Thank you. Okay, 7.11. The Great South Statement of Intent 23-26 and Space Operations New Zealand Statement of Intent 23-24, which is on page 433 of your agenda, and we've got Jason and Michael.
Alright, so good afternoon, Your Worship and Councillors. So I'm here to report to present the Council report for the Great South Statement of Intent 2023 to 2026 and the Space Operations New Zealand Statement of Intent 2023 to 2024. So the purpose of this report is to present these respective statements of intent for council decision on whether or not to receive each of these statements. So just to avoid any sort of confusion and things, so the statement of intent contained in these council reports, this is for this current year. The letter of expectation process we've been going through is for the upcoming year. So options outlined, page 438, is that council receives the Great South Statement of Intent for 2023 to 2026 and Space Operations New Zealand Space Ops Statement of Intent for 2023 to 2024. The respective advantages and disadvantages are also outlined under those options. Receiving is in alignment with the shareholders agreement and provides certainty for Great South for its ongoing funding costs. Option 2 is just the opposite, so that's on page 439, and that is council does not receive the respective statements of intent. So a little bit of background about it. Following the feedback from the draft statement of intent, the final Great South Statement of Intent did not elaborate further on the costs or the distribution of contract funding. However, if you recall, on 13th September, Great South made a presentation and this information was relayed in the council workshop. The other thing was that Great South did include both the Just Transition and the Beyond 2025 workstream in the final display as requested. So we've got the funding that is outlined on page 437. So that is $1.385 million is the total for core and contract funding. There was slight discrepancy between the long-term plan regional development fund budget, but that has since been increased in the annual plan for the following year. So Great South is required, Space Ops are required to produce these annual statements of intent, and then it's for council decision to receive each individually or to not receive each individually. So the recommendation from staff outlined on page 439 is that council receives the Great South 2023-2026 Statement of Intent and the Space Operations New Zealand 2023 to 2024 Statement of Intent.
Any questions from the floor? It's a fairly straightforward process. We've had quite a lot of discussion around it and noting it's sort of dating back to from the 1st of July. Did you have a question, Councillor Chamberlain? So if there's no questions, Councillor Keys.
Sorry, not really related to the funding, although sort of. On page 457 where it's in the statement where they're talking about business sector carbon emissions, and I see that we seem to be the only council that's orange dot beside us there. And then going to 459, where in the KPIs they're talking about 140 or 100 each year. It seems to the numbers 120, 140, 160. I'm assuming it's the difference, the total number. It's not 120 more businesses are going to be each year. It's cumulative total, isn't it? It's not a because would we have that many businesses in Southland that would be participating?
Chami had mentioned at the time of the workshop that the decarbonisation outreach program had so far reached 70 businesses. Like you mentioned, sort of in this year, so I'd say it will be cumulative. That figure wouldn't have so much.
Yeah, I mean, we can only sort of make that assumption now. With
No, it's not really to do with the thing. It was just, well, it was in my mind.
just a comment from me, I guess, on the actual process of the statement of intent, which we've talked about a few times. We had a joint shareholders committee meeting on Friday, and the discussion around simplifying this process and getting it a lot easier, including the KPIs and the measurement of it. So that's a live discussion at the moment, with all of us having an appetite to make this easier, and I see the staff nodding as well, because it's a painful experience. So, well, there's no further discussion. I'm happy to move from the chair and accept A through E. Second report, Councillor Menzies. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? That's carried. Thank you. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Mark. So 7.12, the management report, page 481, and I'll look to my left.
So I might just sneak off.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to the team for throwing this together. But obviously we all noted that there was general election a couple of weeks ago, and while we are in this period, we're now waiting for what that outcome is. The final vote, I believe, or the declaration will be 6th of November. But we're not expecting ministerial appointments until about the middle of November. That's assuming that the negotiations in Wellington are going smoothly in terms of forming a government. But in the manifestos before the election, it was reasonably clear that a number of the reform programs that have challenged this organisation over the last 3 or 6 years, particularly what we knew initially as Three Waters and then as Affordable Waters, is expected to be repealed. National said they would repeal and replace. I think they specified that in their 100-day plan. So if the government was to form relatively cleanly in the beginning of November, 100 days would be up around the end of February. We do, as a sector, there's quite a lot of discussions going on between Taituara, which is the Local Government Managers Association, Local Government New Zealand, which is of course representing elected members, the Office of the Auditor General, who's responsible for audit, and presumably the Department of Internal Affairs, about how the repeal program might affect the long-term plans, and how the intertwining of the Local Government Act and the various bits of legislation that are expected to be repealed or adjusted, how they might intersect, and what that might mean for the. There is a view that it wouldn't be unexpected if it was decided to delay the long-term plan for a year and just do an annual plan. That's not universally easy across the country either, though, because the councils and the farmers are banned from doing an LPP with Three Waters in it by legislation. So, because they were an NTA and it was to proceed with it straight away. Equally, the councils that have been, who were badly affected by the cyclone, they actually got special legislation, which also is part of this confusion. So, while I am actually proud of how the organisation has coped with the turmoil of this ongoing reform, I have to signal to you as it is remembered that it's not quite over yet. And so we will await some clarity in terms of what comes next. There is an expectation that the resource management reform will be altered. The thinking at the moment is that that won't affect the long-term plan particularly significantly, or certainly for the first year or so, but it would obviously have longer-term implications. So, sorry, but still questions and uncertainty is the reality that we're dealing with. But we are expecting that the Three Waters infrastructure assets that council owns won't be transferring and will be shown in their full glory in the long-term plan. And we were not expecting that in the current planning around the long-term plan. There is obviously it's important to acknowledge the flooding, and I missed it, so I'm very grateful for everybody leaping in and doing what needed to get done. Like all of our emergencies, I think it is appropriate that now that things are settling down again, that we do a review of how it performed, what lessons that we can learn from that. So I'll be taking that up with emergency management. I've talked a little bit about the LTP, and there's a reference here to ongoing engagements that the organisation does with the public. I know the building team were out in Watoto yesterday doing one of their drop-in sessions, so still plenty going on. The activity reports, A3s, are attached, and I'm hoping that there are sufficient wise heads down the end there that can answer any questions on them.
So shall we kick off with the first one being the building? Do we have someone from Building Solutions team here, or shall we?
Unfortunately, she couldn't attend. She's got lawyers to deal with the lawyers, legal issue.
Did anyone have any pressing questions on that report that may be able to be answered? Councillor Menzies, Councillor Keys?
Thank you. Just want to acknowledge that the team have completed the work around the conditions on the accreditation clearance, and that should be in at the end of October. So we're able to fit that in with the other demands, which was important, but just to acknowledge the effort that we took. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Menzies. Councillor Keys?
Thank you. I was just a bit concerned as to the trends that were happening there, that the numbers seem to be, the output seem to be taking a dive compared to the numbers being received, and just hoping that we've got a handle on that. It's going the right way now, a month on.
So if there's no further questions on that report for Julie, who can't be here anyway. So we'll move to the next one, which is our community facilities.
Thank you, Worship. Probably a number of things in there, and others may want to add to that, so I'll just ask one question at the moment. Just around the budget, there's a number of figures which would be of cause for some concern unless by the end of the year we would be working to be back on track within the budget. So it's just a question around whether that's likely to be the case.
Same problem, both Mark and Jendi were unable to be here today, so I can't have anyone that can speak to it.
Yeah, so if we can note the questions and then we can
We'll read the other questions. Yeah.
I had the same concern around those budgets as well.
Can I just also add in there, we've still got as number one, I know it's in hierarchical order, but the COVID-19 supply issues. And I know the other reports have kind of taken that out, and it's a risk score of 12, which seems quite high, given contracts now include pandemic clauses and program delays are less prominent. So it's just an examination of that number one risk area.
There's no further questions on that report. Services and library team. Do we have the same?
Unfortunately, he can't be here either. Sorry.
So, any complicated questions on that one? Any questions? We're looking pretty safe. Environmental health. I can see Betty sitting over there, so we have a winner. Do we have any questions on this one that we can actually have answered? Or we're going to let Betty off the hook.
Well, I've got one. Just curious. In the licensing, I was curious if any licensed licensees took advantage of the legislation around the World Cup? Was there any venues that took advantage of that?
Yes, there was. There was about half a dozen that notified us in regards to the Rugby World Cup.
That's good to know. Cheers.
Thank you, Worship. Just wondering about what the benefit will be for the food, alcohol and health renewals going into pathways.
Just, kia ora, three.
Do you want to come up to the table, Betty?
Yes, sorry, apologies. Just some efficiencies there to make that, it's quite a manual process at the moment, so automating it is going to speed that process up and get some efficiencies.
So that would allow people to submit their information they've got electronically.
That part of it's more the renewal side, that on the back end, the team end, that part of the automation.
Efficiency's good.
Yep, sounds priority.
Councillor Matthews.
Just a question relating to previous hearings around requests for licences. Have we got any in the stage of appeal still, or we have all those resolved?
That's a good question. We should go on that one. Just to, yeah, sorry.
So it's just one specific one I was asking about, but that'd be good if you can come back. Thank you.
Thank you. No further questions. Thank you, Betty. And the next one up is forestry. Any questions? Nothing you wanted to share with us? Well,
there's always plenty of good news in forestry, Rob, but next month.
I just see on the previous month's achievements, you've got an item there around possum control at Dipton. Do you know what the extent of that problem was, and has the control sort of dealt to?
That's something we do on an annual basis. So all forestry blocks receive, some possum control and keep it maintained.
Is it a significant issue, or with the annual activities you have in place, it's managed effectively?
Correct.
Just an observation from me around the health and safety. Good to see that there's all zeros in there, and also, yeah, that's, and a high risk area like forestry. It's good to see that they're ticking those boxes.
Through you, Your Worship, I don't want you to run away. You just got here. Say something. So there was no harvesting last month. Generally speaking, and the reason why I'm asking you this question is because this is what you do, and I just want to refresh my own memory around optimum harvesting times and following the markets. Can you give us sort of some just very loose projections for the harvesting period coming up, and what some of the projections are on a sort of per tonnage basis in terms of what we're looking at?
Yeah, look, we can't look too far forward with any more certainty than in 2 or 3 months with our quarterly fixed pricing. What we've seen in this month is that we have got a better result than what we planned for. So we've got a greater profit in the last month than we planned for, and that was due to, again, pushing to find another market for some of our semi-pruned logs. So that resulted in an upward movement of $8 per tonne across some of those grades. So we can expect a better profit return for September. That actually happened in July and August as well. We went past our profit prediction for that as well. So it's all going pretty well there. We've had harvesting progress a little bit further than we thought we would in Gallen Hills. So that's helping our costs drop as well as the market improving. So it's quite good. And we've also found that from an environmental perspective, although it is an exotic forest, we're finding we have a significant amount of indigenous flora and fauna inside those forestry blocks, and that exotic forest is supporting the flora and fauna in there, which is really pleasing. and the water quality is unaffected through the harvesting. We've taken this term round to get drone footage of our harvesting activities to have on record environmental performance.
So just taking a step back, when you say regeneration of that native, is that just self-seeding natural regeneration, or has that been planted?
Yes, it is. So that's stuff that's plants that have probably established in there, but have had an environment that with a tree canopy to be better established. There's a lot of aquatic indigenous species in there.
So does that create an opportunity or a liability from your perspective in terms of re-establishment of exotic forestry, or does it work in favour in terms of saying, well, can we?
That's a question that has been bandied around, Tom, and I think where we've fallen is that it supports it, and the industry's taking that view, it's supporting it, and we're proving that with some DNA sampling in the water, and that tells us exactly the species that are in there, and there's literally hundreds. So it's some really good data, facts that are proving that statement.
Is there an argument there potentially for leaving that establishment of natives, depending on how many stems per hectare, depending on whether or not they can get over 5 metres in height post 1989, carbon conversations around that? Are we crystal ball gazing, or is there ways to enhance that?
Yeah, I think there is in some areas, Tom, where we might look at setbacks from the waterways, which we want to optimise that area, not just leave that. So there's an opportunity to potentially plant natives or allow natives to seed and establish in those areas, which further benefit the water quality. Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Your Worship. So in the strategic priorities, I note that the National Environmental Standards for Plantation Forestry, they've now been replaced by National Standards for Commercial Forestry, is that right?
Yes.
So is that, what do we have to change in the way of management of a portfolio with all the changes that have come through?
So councils do have some obligations within that, and principally just what I've referred to as looking at the environmental performance of that asset, hence taking a very keen view of how we're addressing water quality and indigenous fauna and flora in that area.
Is in that context, are you saying that the forestry carbon management plan has been developed to measure with the ETS? Is there a lot of more compliance on us now?
I don't think there's.
Headway are we making?
You don't think there was more compliance? It's just there's probably more obligation to be compliant than there was, rather than, yeah, that's how I'd view that, looking at the past and the present. In terms of the carbon management plan, that's it, just here.
Okay.
What that's telling us is that there's the opportunity for growth, and that part of our asset, the carbon or ETS, will appreciate in value. And we've got this paper here to deliver to you sometime in early February, and what I wanted to wait until after the December auction to see how that would perform, hence the time frame to deliver at that stage.
So the last ETS auction for the year?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it is, yeah. But bearing in mind, we do have an investment liabilities policy which we're bound to, so when we look at what we're doing with those carbon credits, we need to recognise that we're a risk-conscious entity, and we're generally not wishing to incur additional risk from investment activities. So Council's primary objective when investing is the protection of its initial investment, and generating a commercial return on strategic investments is considered a secondary objective. Therefore, the implications of any sale of NZUs, which is what this paper would be inferring, needs to satisfy Council's strategic objectives and financial risks of owning any further investment. So we will discuss that further on the 14th of February.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stu.
No problem.
What was that? I'm sorry?
Program delivery.
Oh, yeah.
You may not have to come up if there's no questions, but yeah, now we've got a question.
Sorry, thank you, Your Worship. I just noticed under the risk factors, number 1, it's at 16, which puts it as likely and as in under the what's noted as extreme and major, and this is around the current year's work program. We spent quite a lot of time sort of discussing the impact of this from last year. So what does that mean for this year in completion? Because there's another note in here about, yes, the total value of projects, which still seems high, but are we at risk already in terms of not being able to meet that, and what are the opportunities to address that now?
Correct. You may be aware that since the initial report, the previous report, we've had a vacancy that's arisen with the manager's role now being vacant. So it's just, I guess it's highlighting there's still that risk that if we don't get our recruitment in place quickly, then that may have some impact. We are actually trying to work to have other mitigation in place to resolve that, but there is some risk, and yes, that's the rating that we've given it. We realise that we also are making a commitment to achieve our program delivery. We're not giving up yet, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. But there is some risk with the vacancy of the manager's role.
There's high risk around this area at the end of the first quarter, so of further concern, and also noting under there the building consent and resource consent requirements also taking time to work through. Does that mean that your work program around that is delayed because you had all that time frame?
Yes, there are issues around that. What I would say is that we've actually got quite a lot out to procurement, and I'm feeling quite comfortable with components of the work program. Obviously, we had hoped to get between 1 and 2 million of community board projects starting, being taken out of the program for this year, but that actually hasn't eventuated to this point on 1 or 2 million being moved. It's been quite a minor amount that's been moved. So that's probably the risk of those community programs being delivered.
Some of which will be better off funding.
Correct.
And it will be useful to have a report back to us on the better off funding, the projects, what's been completed and whether there's any risk to completion of those. Are they putting at risk other projects that may have, on the face of it, a higher priority?
So we are pulling together a report on that point, so that the governance group is looking to make sure that we are monitoring that quite closely, and the better off funding specifically, because we know there's an end date similar to the Wakakatahi funding as well. We don't want to lose the funding, so we are going to be monitoring that separately as a group, and make sure that we can get that done. But you're correct, we were hoping to be able to move $1 to $2 million worth of small projects. At this stage, we will continue to try and deliver the whole package, but we'll see how we go.
So through you, Your Worship. So I guess does that will have a direct impact on those new projects started or due in construction? There's quite a few there. So are you pretty confident that those projects that have been started or under construction, will we be able to follow through on all of those, do you think? Or is there a chance that some of those will actually have to be
The ones that have gone out for tender and have been procured, we're pretty sure that we'll have, barring a weather event or some major issue that causes us a lot of grief, but it would have to be sort of an exceptional weather pattern that created that. Barring that, our roading program looks like that will be completely delivered. We feel very comfortable with that. The bridges that we have, we've got one. All have been procured apart from one which is tender, I think is just closed. It hasn't been evaluated yet, so it hasn't been let. So So the bridge program looks like we'll be on target. So from a roading perspective, those ones feel all good. Even the water ones are looking, I'm going to say good. The majority of the ones like toilets have, those are being organised and ready to go from a procurement perspective. The ones that are causing us, we were hoping that we'd have some of the smaller ones than toilets. Some of those might have moved, but they haven't. So at this point, we're still madly trying to procure and get those ready.
And so trying to align that mad procurement process in line with, say, as in under resources, you're having to balance that with staff resources. You're reaching capacity now, and talking about that better off funding having an impact on that, and at the same time trying to, I guess, use as many of our own staff and our own contractors as possible. I mean, it's quite a hard balancing act, isn't it, really?
Yep. But we're looking, it is that balance when you lose a critical staff member and you've got that vacancy. But we're trying to plug a gap with consultant, but that consultant, for example, is, to get a consultant at the same level is quite different. That actually knows the ins and outs of the business and all the rest of it. So you do have to hold their hand for a process, and it's not quite as easy as having the resource that was there previously. So a bit of training that's required, and just get them to the place that we need for this particular program of work. Yep.
Councillor Keast.
Thank you, Worship. Just a query about Edendale toilet refurbishment, which is under completed projects. Is that the Kamahi Reserve one? Because I'm not sure that.
I'm sorry, I'd need to find out. Somebody else knows. I'd need to come back to you on that, sorry.
I sort of think it might have been itself being completed because it's still waiting on its rep, so I'm not sure if it's been delivered or not. But yeah, if it's Edendale, I'm a bit puzzled as to where it is.
Cool. Oh, thank you for that, Fran, and we'll move over to our roading one with have we got any questions?
I'm just looking again at that risk, which is it's not quite 25, which is top, but it's at 20 in terms of budgets and cost control, which we've probably got a fairly good understanding of the procurement processes. It's confirming your worst fears, is it?
Your Worship, it's just really highlighting, sort of discussed before, around a 3-year funding window with Waka in particular. That's our budget for the 3 years. Costs have gone up over those 3 years, so from an actual program delivery point of view, we can't deliver the same level of program we had planned on from 3 years ago within the same budget. So that's probably more what it's highlighting. Yes, we're procuring works and delivering, staying within that budget, but we're not delivering necessarily the same volume of work, and that's really what that's predominantly highlighting.
And I would expect that most councils are under similar pressures. Yes, so it's not, and we're not outstanding on the road in that respect. Thank you.
Do we have an impact from the flood on what it's done to your existing sort of work program, and a sort of rough cost to the organisation from?
Yes, we do. So we've probably been reasonably fortunate, I'd say, with the timing of the flooding, if say that, because we haven't quite reached our peak construction season, which generally runs between October through to the end of March. So being September, we've been managed to accommodate the bulk of the repairs pre-peak construction season. So we've been quite fortunate from that point of view. From a cost point of view, we haven't got all the costs in yet, but as a total cost, probably sitting around $1.5 million for the roading activity as a rough order.
Still quite significant.
Yeah, it's quite significant. There's still 3 years, but there's still repair works being undertaken at the moment, so it's not that we've repaired everything, but.
Cheers, Hartley. Just in the strategic planning priorities, you refer to the report refers to coastal erosion and slips, and that a database has been compiled of at-risk locations, and we'll need risk analysis and monitoring kind of ongoing. Is there enough data available to inform kind of monitoring and how to manage those risk hazards, or are there gaps in the information required for Transport to look into those areas of concern?
At this point in time, it's more around where the sites are, the locations, and how frequently we're actually monitoring them. In some cases, it might be a yearly or 6 monthly, just depends on the rate of erosion, or post-major event, as an example. If we have a major flooding event, then we want to get eyes on that just to see how that site's performing, and capturing things like not very complex, pretty basic Excel site, but grabbing 3 or 4 photos of that location, any key measurements, just to keep eyes on it in a lot of cases.
Observational.
Yeah, correct. In some cases, we have had independent assessments carried out to help carry out a risk assessment and potential repair. So if there's funding opportunities that become available, that we've got some sort of intervention that we might look at pursuing, plus potential funding. Through the morning and through the day, we've discussed, you're better off fundings or all that. You never know what's going to come along. So you want as much information on hand if those opportunities do come along.
Are those at-risk locations publicised, or the comments there that this is happening, but is there the opportunity to get a more defined idea of where these monitored sites are and for the interest of the communities?
Through your worship, most of them are pretty common sites. Your Taramia Bay is an example. We've done rock protection, Colic Bay foreshore, so they're pretty well-known sites. Just, I suppose, other than being in somebody's memory or yours or mine and knowing about it, it's do we actually have a central depository for all of that? So if I'll move on, or whoever moves on, actually there is a single depository for it, and there's some way of, we monitor it, but okay, that's good, but give it reassurance of, can we go back and actually see what are the photo or drone footage that we may have. So it's more probably from an internal management point of view, trying to keep an eye on that data in a central place for it.
It's similar theme, but different strategic asset, mainly around the mountain cycle trail, approximately 120 metres completely eroded away, Upper Ariti. Is that, looking at a photo of it, there's not really an opportunity for rebuild in that section, is there? Has there been any thought into an engagement with the trust as far as what's going to happen there?
So the team have been out, they've had a look, assessed, and an assessment in terms of coming up with a fix or what the future, that's still up for discussion. Part of that involves the landowner discussion with the MB, because traditionally they've funded, we've made applications to them to fund any remedial works around major weather events. So yeah, there's still a bit of work to go on what the future of that particular site may look like, and it includes discussions with the trust.
Cycle and kayak trail.
I think it's worth acknowledging the landowner there as well that shifted their fence
there's a nice spot
going, which was really helpful, and I think that was really kind of them.
Yeah, pretty good.
Thanks. Councillor Menzies.
Thank you. I was just going to ask a question about that as well. But there were a number of areas that had issues after the flooding on the cycle trail, and I know you're working hard to get that fully functional for the season, which is really to start about now. Have we had a response from MB about the funding yet?
Not that I'm aware of, but I can check where that's at with the team that are following that up, and then
We won't be doing any work till we get the news from MB?
correct. Some, as mentioned earlier, some of the work's pretty minor, and the landowner's been quite accommodating in some places. But yeah, like that 120 metre section, you're probably talking more like 200 metres of trail that potentially needs to be relocated, most likely. So yeah, it's not a 5-minute task or a cheap exercise potentially. So yeah, it's how you come up with an interim solution, but at the same time without expending money without knowing if you've got a funding source.
That's right, Brian.
Through you, Your Worship. And just going on from the Around the Mountain Cycle Trail, what is the situation whereby we have the boundary between the Southland District and the Queenstown Lakes District with respect to the trail? If we have flooding events or if we have asset damage or infrastructure renewal programs, do we have an agreement between ourselves and that particular council in terms of, do we subcontract to them, or do they use our assets and we charge them, or what happens in that sort of situation? No? Sorry. One of your colleagues is itching to say something.
We hold a licence to occupy over the QLDC land for our cycle trail.
Right.
So it's our cycle trail right to Kingston, but in the portion of Queenstown Lakes, we have a licence to occupy the land owned by QLDC, just like we would any other landowner.
Right. Sure. And the same applies, it's not just QLDC, it's even on the state highway, where the cycle trail runs along the state highway, technically not our land, state highway, but we've got a licence to occupy. But I take your question is probably more from a practical aspect where we've had damage. The section as an example on the Vaughan, that was the road that washed out, so QLDC's, because it's the road that's been affected. QLDC problem, but QLDC problem. But we have, in that instance, they've had their contractor carry out the work, but even day-to-day maintenance activities, I'll use the road as an example. Over the years, it's been our contractors have done it. We've sent the bill to QLDC. In other cases, depending on what work they're actually doing, and maybe their contractor. So it just really depends on what actually occurring at that point in time and where contractors are on their availability.
Sounds like a common sense approach. Yeah. Cool. There's nothing further for Hartley. We'll let you off the hook and move on to Three Waters.
Thank you.
Your Worship. Do you have any questions for Jeff, or is there anything that Jeff wants to let us know? Silence. Isn't good in the land of the Three Waters. That's looking like a nice, quick and easy one. Thank you.
Any major issues or repairs coming through costs from September? Next week.
Through your worship, not to be honest, not really. We've found a little bit of damage at the our wastewater plant. Everything looked nice, but until we actually put the plant or part of the plant back into service, we found out it had been damaged, and some fences have been damaged. But no, there's no major cost.
You're not going to solve that easily.
No, sorry. Just following up on the Lumsden stormwater investigation that's underway now. I think some hotspots being identified. Just wondering the process. Been in discussions with the community board chair as far as just kind of breaking up the issues in the area. When would it be expected that that initial investigation assessment will come back to council and community board to be able to peer review against that local knowledge of the issues?
Your worship, so we have PDP Delmore doing a option assessment. As you know, that's due in very early December. I have given the report that you created, councillor, and we have been to site and looked at all those options with him. So we are compiling that, very comprehensive. So by the start of December, we'll have a report we can present to.
Is it in the scope of that work being done? Are they looking at the entire township catchment, or just the southern area that was originally back in the LTP? I think 2015 was focused on the southern catchment area. Is that investigation work staying focused on that scope, or has the project turned into the wider catchment?
Through your worship, it's over the whole town, so typically east of the main street, and east southeast is the main focus, but we are looking at the whole entirety of the town. Yes. Will the
hot spots identified? I know there's some budget for capital works for the next financial year, but again, is the budget for works then going to be applied to the whole township, or still based on what it was intention what it was intended for in that southern catchment.
So your worship, it'll be put through I suppose the greatest desired need where we can evaluate bang for buck, if you will. We'll apply it to there and knock off the worst and just keep that process going all the way through. Yep.
Thanks for that. Cheers, Jeff.
Sorry, what does PDP stand for?
Oh, sorry, it's Pedal Delamore.
Pedal Delamore.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Chief. Okay, so that takes us to the end of our management report, and I'm happy to move from the chair that we receive it. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Menzies. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, so now on to 8.1 of our report, and that's in the public excluded part of the meeting. So we've got our recommendation that we move into public excluded for the reasons outlined on the agenda, which I'm happy to move from the chair. I have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Fraser.